Basically a platform where we have a discussion and probably more on that I need people to reflect rather than we react on certain things. No? We try when we reflect, we look at ourselves rather than we look at things and we put judgment. Some people say, to judge people is easy rather than to think critically. Then I hope by that we can make this world a little bit better, if I can. If I can contribute in that sense. So before we go, I'm going to introduce my special guest that we flew from Australia. He's basically associate professor from University of New South Wales from Australia. He's a professor in philosophy. Thank you for coming to Malaysia.
Thank you.
So basically, he's also co-founder for Independent Australian Jewish Voice, and he's also executive member of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network and member of Committee of Advisors for Hashim Sani Palestine Studies. So we had like a 2 days conference in So that's why one of the reasons we've been here is on 1 week tour in Malaysia to basically share his views on Palestine. Basically, Peter is quite an ardent supporters advocacy for Palestinian cause. So the big thing is about Peter is because if you don't know by now he's a Jewish by birth. So that's the thing. When you are the Jew, but in somehow you against whatever that Israel is doing. For Malaysian context, what we normally understand is when you're a Jew, you are Israel. When Israel, you're basically Zionist. Whatever that you did to the Palestinian people. So in Muslim people, in Muslim context, they see all Jews are the same. So this is, I want to, make a big difference. I think that's probably one of the reasons why Peter is here. He's that co-founder Independent Australian Jewish Voices, that not all Jews are the same, and not all Jews living in Israel. This is from Australia, okay? So that is, in Muslim context, everything spoke. And another thing that probably people don't quite understand, especially in Muslim context, that not all Jews are, what do you call Judaism, your religion?
Judaism, yeah.
Yeah, Judaism. So Peter is basically a free thinker or atheist in that sense. Is that true?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So in that sense, I think more than 80%, or is it 90% of Israel's basically free thinkers?
I don't know the percentage, but a large number are not believers.
Yeah,
very many
non-believers. So I saw somewhere the figures.
Yeah.
So that is them. So you must make a big difference. So the problem in many conflict that we like to generalize or stereotyping. So that's where we have a problem. We only converse people of the same views, talking to the fire. So that's why the reason I'm bringing Peter here. Okay, I don't want to go too much in that few details. So basically there are 2 parts. One is Palestine. I'll break into 2. That's basically the beginner's part, where I want Peter to be able to explain on the whole thing to make a big difference. And second is probably more the advanced part, international part. Okay, Peter. So how's your trip so far?
Terrific. I'm enjoying it very much. It's always interesting to come to Malaysia.
Anything that you find a bit different in Malaysia context? Anything that you find interesting or a bit different from
It's very different. It's very different. Of course, in particular, the fact that it's largely a Muslim country makes it very different. And politically, that's very different. The attitude to Palestine is very different here. It's more sympathetic here than in America or in Australia.
All right. To be fair, we are Muslim countries, so by default, most of us are basically for Palestinian. It's just that probably, I'm talking about Muslims about 65% in Malaysia, so by default, they support Palestine.
Yes, that's right.
To a certain extent, probably quite active in that advocacy for Palestine. So most of us basically are aware of this issue, maybe except for the younger ones.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't even have a clue on that thing. So
yeah.
I think that's fine. Right. So I've basically the objective I said to correct any misconception. You don't generalize. Not all Jews are Judaism, and not Judaism all living in Israel, and they're not all Zionists. and they're not. This is not also a religious issue. So that's the thing. So because in the Malaysian context, you always portray this thing as a religious issue between the Muslim and the Jews. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
So bringing here, so I think that's probably in a certain sense is a living testimony that not all Jews are the same.
If I can say that, you have to understand that Zionism is very widely shared among Jews. It's the majority opinion, I think, among Jews. It's changing. And my position as a dissident, resisting Jew is still a minority among Jews.
All right.
But in America and in Australia and elsewhere, there are very significant groups who are now protesting about the policies of Israel, partly because Israel claims to be acting for all Jews. And many Jews are wanting to make it clear that this is not the case. And that's becoming increasingly important, especially in America, because America is the biggest supporter politically and financially of the state of Israel. But the American Jews are generally Democrat voters and progressive, and they're having increasing difficulty reconciling the policies of the state of Israel with their own values. They've been at the forefront of the civil rights movement in America, and so they're very progressive in their political views, but Israel is now hard to reconcile. So it's not the majority of Jews, because most Jews grow up with a kind of a misconception, but not just the Jews, because it's the majority opinion in the general public. The mainstream media don't tell you either the history or the current events in Israel. So the Jews are part of the general population and have a lot of misconceptions. But so that's shifting.
All right, thank you. So I think probably that's one of the reasons that you co-founded the Independent Voices of Jews. So just to make a big difference, not all Jews are the same. So that's very important, I think.
That's very important. And increasingly, many Jews who, in fact, even some very, very religious Jews, I'm not a religious Jew, but there are the very fundamentalist Jews in America and elsewhere, hundreds of thousands, who are pro-Palestine. And the reason for that is that if you're a seriously religious Jew, you don't believe that the state of Israel can exist until the Messiah returns.
All right.
So actually, some of the most religious Jews are supporting the Palestinian cause and opposed to the state of Israel.
Yeah.
That's an important category. Now, I'm not in that category, but I share with them the support for Palestine.
All right. So I think probably you've seen on the YouTube, I'll play, I think it's not here, but the ultra-Orthodox Jew, or sometimes called Haredi Jews, probably in London or so.
The Haredi Jews in Israel are Zionists, but in America and elsewhere, there is this group called the Neturei Karta.
Neturei Karta, yeah.
And they're the anti-Zionist Jews.
Yeah.
Because the Haredis, that's the word for the ultra-Orthodox in Israel itself, and most of those are the settlers, and they're the big problem. That's the problem Jews, not the...
So I mean, they also, they believe in second coming of
that's right.
the Savior, but it's not that the second coming by killing people, by stealing people's land. It has to become naturally, because they believe the God chosen people to bring goodness to humanity.
Yeah.
Not through getting the land through
through theft.
Some unlawful means. So we also believe in certain sense we share that view in that sense.
Yeah.
It's just that for ultra-Orthodox or natural cartel, what you said, they are a bit obvious because they're wearing that long, high
the
hat, black hat and everything with their.
But so do the other Jews. Many Jews would dress that way. So the Neturei Karta just look like ultra-Orthodox Jews. They're not distinct by their dress.
Yeah, because for people outside probably know that Peter is just like any other Australian or any USA. You cannot know whether he's a Jew or not. So that's why it's very important that we bring intellectual Jew to speak on behalf, at least on the independent Jews. I'll just it is that I heard Bibi Netanyahu said, even Ilan Pape, the Jews in US, they're more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. It's more that the Christian Zionists a bit more.
That are supporting Zionism and the state of Israel, these fundamentalist Christians who have very literal views of the Christian Bible, and they believe the end of the world will come in a place in Israel. So they are actually very a very powerful political force in the United States.
Right.
And it's a worry because they're fanatically supporting the Zionist program for their own religious reasons.
Yeah, exactly. So anyhow, I mean, if you see even for the Jews, I think all over the world is only about 14 million. Correct. I mean, probably 6 million in Israel and probably across all the world, probably more in US and some part probably in Australia and London and UK as well. I'm gonna play why the Christian Zionists in US. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind with some that share this kind of belief.
No.
I think for the most part, the Christians are okay. It's just that some people, quite a big majority of them, believe in this way that probably it can turn things around if they can really understand the full context of what's happening.
These are the absolute fundamentalist Christians, not the ordinary Protestants or Catholics.
I don't want to be bogged down to the terminology is a bit funny. And fair on that, you know, rather than just blindly follow things and do all kind.
Geopolitical instability in Israel in 1940. Although the vast majority of the international community, the UN, and the United States publicly support a two-state solution to try and end this conflict, after decades of negotiation, final settlement has never been reached. Tensions between the Jewish state and the Arab world continue to fester. Throughout this process, America has remained firmly behind Israel as its greatest supporter. In fact, Israel receives more U.S. foreign aid than any other country in the world. Now, much of this support has been attributed to a strong, wealthy, very pro-Israeli lobby in America, which is true, but you'd think that the majority of the strength behind this lobby would be the Jewish community in the U.S., which is only partially correct, because as it turns out, in terms of sheer numbers, the evangelical Christians from America's Bible Belt make up the majority of this lobby's power base. So he sent Thomas Morton to find out why a bunch of born-again Christians from Texas are so in love with the nation of Israel.
So those who believe in Armageddon.
This may be the most important prophetic spot in the entire Bible, because the final act of the book of Revelation is going to begin right here at this place. The Bible teaches that Russia, Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, and other nations will come down under a UN flag, and they will invade Israel at this particular point. Can you imagine? Thousands of tanks out here in this valley, rumbling, fighting, firing. Can you imagine jet airplanes screaming overhead? The battle is going to be fierce.
The horrific multinational fighting this preacher is describing is the Battle of Armageddon, which is supposed to happen right here, just as soon as Israel is a fully Jewish state. Which is why a bunch of Christians in Texas have become the most fervent Zionists on God's green earth. While most Americans probably think that the pro-Israeli lobby is largely a Jewish thing, actually most of its support comes from right here in the Bible Belt, where evangelical Christians overwhelmingly believe that Israel has a right to exist because God said so.
Go to the phone right now and call that number and say, yes, I'm going to stand with Israel. I'm going to bless the people of the Bible. I'm going to bless God's chosen people.
Will those of you in this audience who support the state of Israel stand to your feet and give a shout of support?
While a lot of Israel's financial support does come from Jewish wallets, there are close to 70 million.
All right, we don't have to see the whole views, but I think you get the idea. But they're quite a strong voice in the US that give support to whatever that US is currently doing now. I think we hope that with more moderate voice, we have more critical thinking, that, I don't know, we can turn one or two people that they are able to see things in a better perspective with information that we get from SLEZAK more. No, I think when I saw the Black Lives Matter, they said nothing changed unless the people who benefit from that system, i.e. the white people, come and help the black people when we see there is injustice in certain places. So I think in this regard, probably Peter SLEZAK is doing some part of it. So
it's a small part of it. The change will happen when America will decide that it's not in its own strategic interests to support Israel, and America is the key.
Right. Yeah. All right. Do you want to add anything on that? So we really hope, like you said, from Peter said, probably we had quite understand the Jews' politics and mentality. The change should be more coming from the outside, i.e., from you. Yes.
The United States, but the Jewish community is important, and the shift inside the Jewish community is going to be very important, and they're changing because they're starting to discover how bad the state of Israel is in terms of its human rights violations. It's a very tragic and serious issue, and the Jews are starting to understand it in a way that they didn't before. The mainstream media, and certainly the Jewish community, they don't know. In fact, for example, the tragedy of 1948. In Israel and in the Jewish community, they have no idea how bad it was or what happened. Massacres were hidden for a long time. They just recently discovered another major massacre, the Tantura massacre, which these are very controversial in Israel. They don't want to acknowledge the extent to which the state was founded in a crime, in a big crime. And the history is a very unhappy and tragic story. 750,000 Palestinians were expelled. 500 villages were obliterated. This was in the founding of the state. Those villages were actually razed. They were disappeared.
Are you saying that they don't know what did they teach in Tel Aviv University?
The Jewish public in Israel didn't know the story. They're told mythology about how when Israel was founded, all the Arab states invaded to try to destroy this fledgling state, and it was a miracle that it survived. It wasn't a miracle. If you read the historians now, it's clear that Israel was always militarily superior. It had more men under arms. It was never really in a military threat. And even the leaders of Israel have repeatedly now admitted that the subsequent wars were always overwhelmingly favored by Israel. They weren't wars of self-defense. They were wars of choice. And in fact, Begin, one of the prime ministers, admitted this in '67 and so on, where they chose for strategic reasons to invade Egypt and so on. So the whole history of Israel has been really a lie. And the lie has not been just among Jews. The way mainstream media and public understanding has been a lie. I'll give you one quick example. It was perhaps before the time of some of you, a Hollywood movie called Exodus, starring the very handsome actor Paul Newman. And it was the story of how my family, for example, after the Second World War, were refugees from the Holocaust, including my family. And they fled to a safe haven, a refuge in Israel. The whole movie's a lie. It makes out as though the theme song, God Gave Us This Land, as though there was no Palestinians there. There was nobody there. This was an empty land. They even say that. That's a famous slogan. It was a land without people for a people without a land. This is nonsense. And this is the mythology on which still the Jews believe they have a right to this land. So this is a serious problem of the mainstream media and understanding, not only the Jews. So it's a serious issue still, to tell the history properly.
So like, I don't know, it's Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is one of the Jew, same as you, a philosopher, is quite critical of the US, Israel. He said there is this, I think he wrote some things about the responsibility of the intellectual to say the right thing to people. So in this sense, what do you think of those? So there is also this question, I just lump it together, that is it, there is also boycott of academic in Israel, in the academic institutions. So some say, so why you boycott us, in the sense that, you know, we are more the left-leaning in helping, or, you know, but this one, I see that there is also complicit of the truth, the history, and
well, let me say something about Chomsky, and that paper, The Responsibility of Intellectuals, was written during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, long time.
And it's still a very famous and very important paper, because his point is that the most guilty, the worst propagandist and the most indoctrinated are the smart guys, are the educated, not the ordinary person. The professors, the academics, are most responsible for propagating these lies. And so he's warning against, that's why the academics hate Chomsky, because he's exposing their deceit and their lies. So he's a very important hero, and he's a big spokesman for years now for the Palestinian cause, and a critic of the state of Israel and its history. He's one of the major writers about that. So it's important to understand the source of the propaganda.
I just want to add, I watched Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. He said he was inspired by Chomsky writing on that responsibility of intellectual. For your record, Ilan Pappé, one of the new historians, tried to challenge the narrative, the existing narrative of how Israel people understand history, of their history.
That's right.
So Ilan Pappé was, I think, was nominated as the best lecturer in Tel Aviv University, right? A year before he was asked to leave. He was for being too critical of Israel, for challenging the narrative and whatnot. So he said he was inspired by Chomsky writing on that responsibility of intellectual to speak the truth, even though sometimes it's again your own interest. So that's the thing. That's what Peter SLEZAK is doing. I share with him. To me, people say you can be just, but what's your benchmark? What's your benchmark? I said in Islam there is one benchmark. You know, Islam is always about justice. You know, I share in I think it's chapter 4 verses 1 to 5. You know, said those who believe, you know, just be fair, even though it's again your own self. Wala ala anfusikum awil walidaini. Walau, even though against your own parents, your family. Even though again wal aqrabin, even though it's against your own people, like what SLEZAK is doing, you have to speak the truth. You know, no matter what. Of course, in between, you may lose your job. you may,
and many have in Australia and America and England. A lot of the outspoken critics have lost their job, or even Alan, what's his name, Norman Finkelstein, who's a famous historian, one of the many, like Chomsky, whose parents were Holocaust survivors, like my own parents, and he was not given tenure because of the influence of the Israel lobby, people like Alan Dershowitz, who interfered in the process. So people's jobs are often threatened around the world increasingly. There are a number of cases like that.
All right. So Norman Finkelstein is another figure in the Palestinian advocacy, also a Jew. He was quite an advocate, and I think he lost his job contract.
Yes, he did.
Whatever. So for your own self, do you have any problem with, you know, your job? Is your family? Is there anything that is your family okay that you are? That there is this famous word that they call it self-hating Jews, or traitor to your own kind. So what do you say about that?
Well, look, I'm very proud of being a self-hating Jew in that category, because it's a sign that I must be doing something right, because I'm being critical and I'm getting a lot of hostility from the Jewish community. I've had my share of hostility. It's not too serious. But it's important because in Australia, I have a certain regard. I'm an academic, a respected academic in Australia. And it means that people pay attention. And while some are very dismissive and hostile, other people are interested in engaging with me to understand why I would take this position, given my background, because I have, as I mentioned, parents who suffered from the Holocaust. So I understand the story and I understand the history. I have family in Israel. And so many Jews, I go to conferences. I've been banned from a conference, a Jewish conference in Israel. I presented on a couple of occasions, and subsequently, because I support the boycott movement, I got banned from presenting. But I still attend, and many Jews come up and want to talk to me and want to engage, to understand. So it varies a little bit, but on the whole, this is a sign that the community, not the leadership, if you listen to the leaders, you get a dogmatic, dismissive view. They lie. But the general public, they're starting to think for themselves a little bit. So that's an important role that we can play by engaging in the Jewish community to try to show them. And as you mentioned, Ilan Pappé and a couple of other historians have been vital in revealing the truths about 1948 in particular, how the founding of Israel was an immense crime.
Is there anything for those, in Malaysian context, they say it's one of how they dismiss, even for Malay Muslim, one is probably they don't interested, and second, they say this thing is a bit too complex for them to really understand. the whole issue of Palestinian and Israel conflict. Yeah. So anywhere that probably you can suggest, a book or things to see the more the neutral reference that people can have.
Look, you have to
yourself.
Well, you have to. It's a good question about sources to rely on, because there's so many sources that are telling you the wrong things. Yeah. I think there are a couple of sources that are important. The human rights organizations like Israel's own B'Tselem. If you go onto those websites, you go on Human Rights Watch. There's a human rights organization inside Israel called Adalah, which looks at human rights of the Arab population, Palestinians. There are a number of important sources. I'm trying to think quickly of websites that can give you important insights. I think B'Tselem is one of the most important. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all three of those came out recently declaring Israel to be an apartheid state. This was a bombshell. Mind you, this is not new. It came out recently, but this has been clear for a very long time. So it's important to find scholars like, if you watch any of the online interviews with Chomsky or with Finkelstein or with Ilan Pappé, those are the important sources. Ilan Pappé's books, they're very readable and they're telling the history in a way that is very important.
So Mark, that what Ilan Pappé, the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. Okay, I just want to, we go into that, if you see at the back, it's a boycott apartheid Israel. Basically, it is for Malaysia, where I'm coming from, in Pawina. And I think you're also a member of BRS. Are you? Right.
Of course.
Of course. And Norman, we are, so that is one of peaceful way that we are trying to advocate to really people to really put pressure on Israel to, at least to, to make the Palestinian people more livable in that sense, and how they are. Basically, it's always wall checkpoint. So I think always living under that kind of, especially live. Got anything to us, you can just put your point. Can you give it to me? Just start from there. Any question that's relevant, you can put in the comment box. So I'll relay to Peter. And for those who probably have any other question, probably I can reply after this recording, and I'll give it to Peter.
Can I add something before we go to the previous one? You asked me about sources, and I couldn't think quickly. There's another one that's very important. Is a source called Mondoweiss. Mondoweiss, and the other one is Electronic Intifada. Those are very, very good journalistic sources of analysis and insight into the alternative accounts. They're very important.
One thing that even BDS Malaysia that we are trying to focus on right now for Palestine is more on the apartheid issue. So this is a bit controversial actually for the Zionist side. So I'm going to play a video on that. But before that, like Peter said, there are a few neutral sources in certain sense. The B'Tselem, the BTSELEM. Yep. So that's basically human rights for the Israel in Israeli side.
Another one is Defense of Children International, DCI International. That's one of the most important sources to show how the rights of children are violated. Right. So there are a number of, they'll come to mind as we talk.
So Jewish Voice for Peace. And I think before that, there is, I think, Yashdin, as we come out with that apartheid report, I think 2000, then comes B'Tselem, I think 2001. Then we have Human Rights Watch in 2001 as well, I think in July 2001. So I think it's quite a comprehensive report. And the last one is basically the Amnesty International, with 280 pages, documenting probably the evidence and allegations for apartheid in Israel. So you can check that in Amnesty International. So I just want to play how the Zionists in the Federation of Zionists in Australia to the report of Amnesty International report. So this is basically in Australia probably Peter just like just comment on that. His name is Jeremy Liebler.
78-page report found Israel has maintained, quote, a system of oppression and domination over Palestinians within Israel's borders and the occupied territories. Amnesty highlighted the regular eviction of Palestinian families from their homes under the illegal settlement program, as well as the restriction of movement and lack of political rights given to Arabs.
It's not the act of violence. I have seen violence before. It is the cruelty of the system, the intricate, evolving administration of control, dispossession, and inequality, the incredible, detailed bureaucratization upon which that system is predicated.
Amnesty joins a growing list of rights groups which have made such a determination, which includes Human Rights Watch and other similar agencies. Now, Israel rejects any allegation of apartheid. Its foreign minister says the report is false, biased, and anti-Semitic. Joining me now for his thoughts on this report is the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, Jeremy Liebler. Jeremy, thanks for your time. I know you've been critical of the broader findings in this Amnesty International report, but can Israel learn anything from what's been uncovered in this analysis?
Well, Kieran, firstly, thanks for having me. It's difficult to learn something from a report that in effect calls for your destruction or national suicide. So I think there is certainly room in the debate. Israel is not beyond reproach. Israel is not beyond criticism. It's certainly not perfect. It is a democracy like Australia, like the United States, that has its imperfections. But this report does not give Israel any option to be legitimate in the eyes of Amnesty International. It literally commits suicide and ceases to be a Jewish state. So it's quite difficult, I think, in this situation.
Okay, we stop first. So this is one of the. I'll try to be the devil's advocate fully on that. So it's that give no options. Like if you accept that Israel is an apartheid state, so it's basically like national suicide, and basically you have to forego.
That's such rubbish. This guy is a typical leader of the Jewish community. The idea that you are criticizing human rights violations, how can he run the line that it's asking for suicide? It's simply asking to obey international law, to recognize the legitimate rights of the Palestinians, not only inside Israel. This is the rhetoric which you get from leaders, which is just utter. I'm lost for words to describe how offensive and outrageous this kind of response is. And he will admit, oh, Israel's not perfect. But he doesn't talk about the extent to which Israel is committing crimes in international law. And let me say, Israel itself, so-called proper Israel, is guilty of the crime of apartheid as described in international law. The West Bank is worse. It's a military occupation, which is a brutal military occupation. It's illegal. Every single settler in the West Bank is illegal according to the Geneva Conventions. There are now 700,000 or 800,000 settlers. Each one is illegal. Gaza is worse still. So apartheid is the best you can say, and that applies to Israel. The West Bank is worse than apartheid, and Gaza is worse still. So this is the kind of propaganda and the rhetoric where they reverse it, and he, of course, uses the usual, it's anti-Semitic. So the moment you criticize Israel, according to international law, they throw back at you that you're a Jew hater. It's just, I'm avoiding saying rude words because I think this is outrageous.
Okay, just to be fair to them, okay, in a certain sense, I'll try to play their
Don't play the devil's advocate.
No, don't play. No, I'm just, we need to be able to engage. Okay. Otherwise, there's no discussion on it.
Sure.
So I'll try to play.
Sure.
So, of course, there is also a fair, I saw somewhere in YouTube, they say, in that sense, where do you want me to go?
Nobody's
migrate to Zimbabwe or
nobody's telling the Jews to go anywhere. The idea that this is to get rid of the state of Israel, how could it possibly be arguing to get rid of Israel, to ask it not to violate the rights of the Palestinians? Why would he even say something like that? This is to put into people's minds, especially Jews, that they're somehow in fear of their life if they obey international law. If he was asked, what does he say about the report? He doesn't talk about the specific provisions, the expose of the crimes. Instead, he throws it back. How could it possibly be a threat to Israel to simply be asking to obey international law and to not violate the rights? There are 50 or 60 laws on the books in Israel. In 2018, Israel actually enacted the nation state law, which now declares Israel is the state only of the Jewish people. So how is it, because they use this kind of trick, they say, oh, if Israel is not going to be a Jewish state, you've destroyed Israel. That's a bad piece of rhetoric and metaphor. No, it may not be a Jewish state. And the term democratic state, it's not a democratic state. It's a lie to keep saying Israel is a democratic state. It's not democratic because the rights of the Palestinians in Israel are violated. The rights of the Palestinians in all of the West Bank, which they control completely. This is just typical of the leadership there.
All right. Okay, I think we have jumped a few of what is going to say about settlement, about I think I just pray a little bit, so until 3 or 4 questions, and probably we can just lump it together. Just let me know if it's 11 o'clock. What time is it now? 10:10. Okay.
The glaring issues, it's been a major issue for a number of years now, is this issue of settlements. Does that make Israel a bigger target?
Look, Israel lives in a very complicated and difficult part of the Middle East, and settlements and the discussion, be it criticism, have a role to play in finding a resolution to, what feels like a never-ending conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. But what we need is nuanced, thoughtful, and balanced interrogation of these issues. And if you take this report, it was launched yesterday in Lebanon by Amnesty International. Lebanon is a country that denies its Palestinian inhabitants basic human rights: the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to work in many, many industries, including education and healthcare. Whereas Israel has 20% of its population who are Arab or Palestinian. They have full equal rights. They vote in elections. The current government has Mansour Abbas as a senior minister in the government from an Arab Islamist party. There is an Arab judge on the Supreme Court. There are Arab doctors. Anyone that has been to Israel would know that the allegation of apartheid is simply false and an insult to those that suffered under real apartheid regime in South Africa.
Going back to that issue of the settlements,
Okay, I think we got it. The whole point is basically Islam got settlements, it's a bigger target. So our potential doesn't even look into the history how that all the checkpoints, all the walls are built in the first place, because there are so many suicide bombs in that sense. So say democratic in a sense was revealed, Amnesty International revealed in Lebanon, which is according to Israel is they have far more undemocratic system of government.
Why does he mention Lebanon? There are a lot of bad countries in the world, and when Israel is criticized, he starts talking about Lebanon to distract attention. That's not helping.
Talking about Iran, Arab countries.
That's for a different discussion. He's asked about Israel, and he starts to show how bad some other country is.
Yeah.
That's really not helpful. And it didn't answer the question about the settlements. He didn't mention that every single settlement and settler is illegal under the international law, under the Geneva Conventions. He didn't mention that the wall takes nearly 10% of the West Bank, and that was declared illegal in 2004 by the International Court of Justice. So, he's avoiding talking about these things as if somehow poor innocent Israel. It's very complicated. That's the usual excuse. Yeah. It's very simple. They're violating international law, and they should stop. It's pretty simple.
All right. So you say, how come all these human rights watch just take one-sided conclusion and they're giving no room?
Not one-sided. What's one-sided when you're looking at international law and you list? Look, let me go back to a point. I mentioned in Abdallah, in Haifa, there's a human rights organization. It's an Israeli organization. They have listed, look up the website, 50 or 60 laws that Israel is imposing as discriminatory against the Palestinian citizen. He mentions there's a judge and of course there are, but he doesn't mention the 50 laws, including the nation state law, which now declares they now demoted Arabic. It used to be an equal language with Hebrew. Now it's not the equal language. In every way, the amount of money that goes to education, look, it's a disaster. And that's inside Israel, which is not as bad as the West Bank. So these guys are just lying through their teeth. That's the bottom line.
So for those who are probably not so familiar with the Palestinian issue, there are 20% of Palestinians who live in proper Israel after 1967 war. They don't know what to.
They have citizenship, but they don't have Israeli nationality. Israel is the only country in the world that distinguishes citizenship from nationality. Yeah. So, that's apartheid.
So basically, in what Prof. Peter SLEZAK said in 2018, they make a law, a nation state law. Basically, the constitution said Israel is a Jewish state.
The state of only the Jews.
the rights of self-determinations in that countries. No, it can. They can be anything they can do, but they can vote. So that's one that they have. Like you said, what Peter said. What about Islam? So basically, you also, I mean, using that philosophy's argument, say when you say you did that, you also did that. So basically, both are wrong in that sense. So they just, or if you put in Alan
Dershowitz.
Yeah. He said if you in an argument, normally he said both are doing wrong. You should focus more on doing the more wrong than the least wrong. It's right. So what's your argument in that sense? Look, so they said the Arab countries is basically.
Look, you can go around the world and look at every country in its own terms and find out what's good and what's bad. That's not an excuse for somebody, especially for Jews and especially for Israelis. This guy is the leader of a Jewish organization in Australia. You know, look, it's pretty simple. You can tell from what I'm saying. They're simply lying. These things he's saying are not true. And it's not controversial. I've mentioned a few of the sites. Look, when Amnesty, my view of Amnesty International and United Human Rights Watch and the others, what took them so long? This hasn't been new. They suddenly discovered that it's an apartheid state. Look, I give talks and I show the statements of the earliest founders of the state of Israel were much more honest. So I give quotes from Ben Gurion, from various figures. They were much more open and honest. They intended the state of Israel to be for the Jews only. Begin and Ben Gurion and I put up slides to show that they were open. Ben Gurion, who was the founding prime minister of the state of Israel, said, we took the state from the Arabs. They were here before us. Of course, he said, if I was I'm quoting now, almost word for word. Ben Gurion said, if I was an Arab leader, I wouldn't make peace with the Jews. We took their land. And he said a few more things. He's completely, now these leaders don't talk that way anymore. Now I'm quoting Ben Gurion, the founder of the founding president, prime minister of the state of Israel. They were very honest about it. Various other ones, I have slides to show. The mass murderer, Ariel Sharon, he became prime minister. He was a mass murderer. I mean, I'm being blunt. He said, if you look at the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, he says, it's not a democracy. We didn't use the word democracy. It wasn't intended to be a democracy. It was intended, as we now see, explicitly, a state for the Jews only. And they were concerned, in fact, so was Ben Gurion, how to get rid of the Palestinians. And you know what Ben Gurion said? We have to wait for an appropriate occasion, perhaps a war, which is what happened. And then they expel even more of them. The whole idea, as was in 48, was to expel the Palestinians. And this is what they're living under. It's a regime where they're regarded, a very important and wonderful Palestinian who was a member of the parliament, the Knesset, Hanin Zouabi. She said, I'm not a tourist here. I'm not a migrant. This is my country for generations. And that's how they're treated. They're treated now as foreigners in their own country. Israel is like that. And these guys pretend it's a wonderful democracy. That's the rhetoric around the world.
You guys got anything to ask? Got any viewers online?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Professor, have you been labeled by fellow Jews as anti-Semitic?
You can't call me anti-Semitic because I'm Jewish, but I can be, they use the term, as Boon mentioned, I'm a self-hating Jew. That's this idiotic, psychological, psychiatric, diagnosis. It's complete nonsense. And it's like in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. If someone would be a dissident voice in the Soviet, they would send them to a psychiatric ward because the state was so perfect that you couldn't be critical unless you're crazy. So the idea is, oh, you couldn't criticize Israel unless you're crazy. It's just a nonsense. It's a way of shutting up. You see, it's a way of not listening to what the person is saying. Let's say I'm a self-hating Jew. But the question is, what am I talking about? Listen to what I'm saying. So I hate myself. Okay. But maybe I'm telling the truth. So that's what you should pay attention to. Okay, don't psychoanalyze me. Ask about the facts. But this is a trick. Oh, he's crazy, so let's not listen to what he says. That's the trick.
So anything else, you guys? So, Prof also is I think he also specializes in psychology.
Well, sort of, yeah.
Philosophy and psychology.
Yeah, I mean, not a practicing psychologist.
Okay. I got another one is from Benjamin Netanyahu in Bill Maher, but probably their line of arguments basically almost the same. all of them are basically the same. Probably we don't have to play. I think we conclude in probably about 10 minutes time. I just play Benjamin Netanyahu just got into power just recently. I think they got about 4 or 5 prime ministers in 4 years, just like Malaysia.
Yeah.
We got the 4th recently with Anwar Ibrahim, and also they got the hardline man. I talked to him. I said about the politics in Israel, the center left, right. But according to there is only 2 types, far right,
right and extreme right.
Extreme right or far right. So that's the thing. So we see that the current prime minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, is talking to Bill Maher.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, that is even worse than Jeremy Libler. This is even worse. But I think that the argument is almost similar. The line is the argument is almost similar, but I think they have.
Anti-Semitism is the longest hatred in history. It goes back thousands of years. We've dealt with bigger problems than these stupidities. But the communists blame the Jews for being capitalists.
Sorry, I just give you a little bit.
My first question: Kanye West this week has said, "I'm a bit sleepy tonight, but when I wake up, I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. Will Israel retaliate?"
Anti-Semitism is the longest hatred in history. It goes back thousands of years. We've dealt with bigger problems than these stupidities. But the communists blame the Jews for being capitalists. The capitalists blame the Jews for being communists. You have a problem, blame the Jews. It's old stuff. It shouldn't have any place in civilized discourse, and that's the reason we established the Jewish state, so the Jewish people would have defense against these absurdities, and sometimes coupled with violence. We don't let that happen again.
Okay.
Just 4 minutes, and we just go through everything.
I just want to read a few quotes from American congressmen, Congress people rather, just to show that Kanye West's comment is not really out of order with some things that are said by people in more official positions. Here's one: Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. 10 years ago, if you read that to me, I thought that would be from Hezbollah, American congressperson. Another American congressperson says the reality of Israel's apartheid government, goes on to say the occupation and ethnic cleansing Palestinians live with every day. Another one says Israel targets media sources so the world can't see Palestinians being massacred. I have 3 questions for you. Are you massacring Palestinians? Are you ethnic cleansing? And are you an apartheid state?
No, no, and no. These are all ridiculous charges against the one democracy in the Middle East, the one democracy that upholds human rights, that defends freedom, and is America's best ally. So I think these people should wake up to reality, but I think that's a far too great a hope. It's not going to happen. We just have to defend ourselves against these people because they purvey lies. You ever hear the word fake news? This is fake old news. It goes back thousands of years. We're not impressed by it.
Okay. But could you become an apartheid state? The critics of Israel here in America and some in your own country talk about the fact that Israel is kind of a population time bomb, and that if 51% of Israel would become Arab, because you do have Arab citizens who are actually treated better in Israel with more rights and more freedoms than they are in their own in other Arab countries. But if 51% of Israel became Arab, then you would have to become an apartheid.
Sorry, this is
something that you.
They call it Arab. They don't call it Palestinian. Just to degrade them, the Palestinian from. They
just exactly.
Just any Arabs.
That's right.
Think about as much as you're critical.
Because I think they don't have the facts right. I mean, they're about 20% of Israel's population is Arabs, and they're really the only Arabs in the Middle East who enjoy full and equal civic rights in the Israeli democracy. And I've also made it an effort to incorporate them in the tremendous success story that is Israel. And I'm happy to see that that is happening. But the demographic balance is maintained. The most important thing is the democratic balance is maintained, because everyone has a right to be part of the Israeli democracy, the Israeli success story. I don't think that's a real issue. I think it's a bogus charge, and especially a bogus charge that's coming from the Palestinians, who oppress gays, oppress women, and are in league with Iran, which is tormenting its citizens, suppressing women there. And if I have to say anything, the place where they should direct their fire is at the Iranian regime, and they should support the brave women of Iran that are showing the world what courage is. That's where it is. That's where I'm supporting the people of Iran and standing up to you.
This is I.To. So that's basically okay. You see from the arguments, basically about 80% are similar. For Alan Joshua's, it's basically
of course, they all say the same things. Of course.
Yeah. Right. Anything you want to add on that? You want to add on that? Comment on that?
No, but it's just interesting, as you say, they all say the same things, and they repeat again. Look at some other regime, and they just simply flatly deny what are really uncontroversial facts about what's going on there. Somehow that works to brainwash people, to make them feel reassured that things are okay, but it's not working. And Bill Maher reads out, those were Congresswomen, Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib. And everything they said was perfectly correct. He says, no, false, false, false. No, they were true, true, true. Everything they said. But that's the difficulty now, where these conflicting views, they can't both be right. And the truth, you can't hide it permanently. And that's what's, I think, the hope, that we can start to expose the reality to wider audiences around the world.
Just one thing, from what, there are a couple of things I think I cannot ask him so many things. We'll go into the second segment. I just want, we're talking about solutions. One thing is, one thing that they cannot, they're just talking, I'll try to cram everything together about one state or two states. So Norman Finkelstein is for the two states, because basically there are so many UN resolutions out there that supporting two-state solutions, about 165 countries, all the Arab countries, so basically it's all there. So that's on one part. There's so many UN resolutions, and we said that is basically what Palestinian Arab, is basically the whole countries agreeing to the two-state. Okay, this is Palestine, this is Israel. Even though after the Oslo Accord, things are even worse off, they agree for two-state, but now I think from a couple of thousand, I think now it's about 700 to 800,000 illegal settlement in the territory of supposed to be Palestinian state. So some critics say that is almost like, it's irreversible. But according to Norman Finkelstein, we have the international support for the two states. For the one state, like BDS is championing, everyone has equal right forward under one country. So that we are focusing, stop the military occupations, 1 person, 1 vote, no checkpoints, and basically the rights of return for 6 million refugees. It used to be about 600,000 during the 1948 war. So that's what we are championing, we are advocating. So in certain sense, it's one state in that sense, one democratic state, all people equal under the states. So that is one. But just that normal. So the way I understand from Jeremy Libler, Netanyahu, that for them, one state is almost, we said the two-state critics say is Wizard of the Oz. For one state, it's like man on the moon. So it's like you're working man on the moon. It's even more undoable.
I think that's right. Look, a lot of serious people that I admire are now arguing that it's impossible to have a Palestinian state. It has to be said, by the way, that the state that would have been the Palestinian state, the West Bank and Gaza, that was a huge compromise already from the Palestinians that gave up their claims to 78% of their traditional ancestral home. And they made a very big compromise when they admitted the state of Israel in 1988, Yasser Arafat and others. They acknowledged the state of Israel. The Zionists never admit that the Palestinians made such a concession. They think that they were the rejectionists, and they always were. That's not true either. The Palestinians had acknowledged, I think, the big compromise that they were willing to settle for the small. The settlements now are 700,000. The question is whether there's a viable state left. And if you look at the map, the Oslo Accords were a terrible betrayal, according to Edward Said and others. That created the current problem because it gave 60% in the Jordan Valley under exclusive Israeli control. In fact, the whole thing is under Israeli control. The different regions are, even Ramallah and the centers of Swiss cheese. And even the parts that are under exclusive Palestinian control, the Palestinian Authority is collaborating with Israel to maintain the occupation. That's an important point. The Palestinian Authority is understood to be sustaining, outsourcing the occupation. It's not part of the solution.
Extension of Israeli.
It's Israel. They call it the security coordination. Yeah. And we've heard in the conference in University of Malaya some important Palestinians pointing out how this is actually the problem, not the solution. But to go back to your question about the two states, one state, the problem of one state is almost insurmountable for a number of reasons. The attitudes are side and the Jewish community in the world that you can't simply say, let's all just be happy together when there's such deep hatred and fear. It's unjustified. But on the Jewish Israeli side, they've been created a sense of fear and uncertainty. You can't just, they don't give the 20% that they have equal rights. They're not going to give it now to everybody from the Jordan to the ocean, to give everybody, let's all live happily. Now that is a nice solution. And some people are pushing hard for it because they think politically it's the only viable alternative left. I sort of agree with that, but perhaps the only solution is in stages. First, they should agree that the UN 242 on the Green Line, the settlers that are now in Israel, they should have the choice to stay there or live under a Palestinian authority, because that's Palestine. So I've heard of solutions where some few fundamentalists will stay. My feeling is that the best solution would be to make some interim arrangement where there's a two-state and you increasingly cooperate economically and culturally and break down the barriers of hatred and fear, and then maybe move to a unified binational state in the longer term. I think that is the only solution, but it couldn't happen suddenly. Chomsky and others point out that it's unrealistic to imagine that suddenly the Israelis and the Jews around the world will decide, yes, we better just give all the Palestinians equal right. It won't happen because the conditions are not right. I think it is the right solution. One person, one vote is the only real democracy, but it's a little bit optimistic.
All right. Now, being the interviewer, the moderator, I supposed to play on the Israeli side, even though you forbid me from doing.
No, please. You should be the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
No, I expect it.
No, the thing is, I was even yes, I always like to watch the other side. So from what I understand is that probably Jew is the most persecuted race in the world throughout history. The most persecuted race, probably even until now. I mean, so when they have that the Jewish state, I think they have some sense of security in a sense. They a country that otherwise don't support. At least they got something on themselves. They've been traveler. I mean, for a nomad for 2,000 years. Now they got the country. So why should I leave it and you being a nomad again and start So the thing about, giving that state is...
You're a very good devil's advocate, but everything you're saying is crazy. So nobody's asking the Jews to become nomads again. That's the first thing. Nobody's trying to get rid of them. That's the first thing.
Probably you got Australia to Sydney to go to, but...
Yeah, so that's the first thing. The second thing is about their fear. Look, it's true. Look, I've got the same history. I told you, my parents were victims of the Holocaust, so I get it. You can't explain to me about anti-Semitism. I grew up with it in my blood. Israel is not under threat. Israel is the fourth or third most powerful military in the world. Palestinians haven't got one tank. They haven't got one helicopter. They haven't got one F-16 jet. They knew that Israel had a security problem. The wall that was built, the illegal wall, is not a security wall because there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians on the other side of the wall. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians go to work inside Israel. It's not a security problem. It's a territory problem. Israel wants the territory. If they were really worried about the Palestinians, why are they building settlements inside Palestine? It's not a security problem. So, this is the mythology. It's not a military security problem. There would be no security problem. I mean, Palestinians travel backwards and forwards, even from Gaza, I learned. They go into Israel.
I think that's a very good point. If you think about security, the wall and everything, why should you build your house inside the Palestinian area?
And not only that, by the way, I've traveled through the wall there. You go backwards and forwards. It's not a problem for Palestinians to find ways to cross the wall if they want to. This is not the wall wasn't a security barrier. It was a border, a de facto national border to keep the Palestine in one side.
But they said through the wall, they reduced the suicide bombing and everything.
There hasn't been suicide bombing for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's not a fear. And the Palestinians gave that up. It was a terrible thing to do. I think this was indefensible. I mean, one has to understand Palestinian reactions and the oppression they feel and their resort to violence. I think it was a terrible thing and a mistake anyway. But they haven't resorted to any serious... Now, there are the occasional acts of violence. But, the violence from the Israeli side is overwhelmingly greater in Gaza and in the West Bank. Just in the last few days, they have shot dead unarmed Palestinians. They do it every week. 2 Palestinian kids are shot dead every week in the West Bank. So the violence is on the other side, not from the Palestinians. And if occasionally some Palestinians resort to violence, it's sort of understandable. I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying it's okay. They are under such oppression. It's a wonder there is so little violence from the Palestinians. If you don't know how much violence they are subject to, house demolitions on a regular basis. They're told they've got twice in the middle of the night and a bulldozer comes in and knocks down the whole house. Look, this is going on and they're being shot dead in the streets regularly. So, and I'm not even talking about Gaza, where they have major atrocities on a regular basis. So, the violence is a monopoly, a huge monopoly of violence on the Israeli side. It's not the Palestinians that are committing. So who's got the security problem? The Israelis or the Palestinians? It's the Palestinians that are suffering from the violence of a military occupation and attacks. So Israel has no security problem.
Yeah, I told one of my Christian friends, I said, in Muslim contact, they said Palestine is a whole Hamas. That's one. So I said they're all terrorists, so they're equally to be blamed because they fire rockets in that sense. It's okay, that's them. So I just check the facts, right? But I said I'm not really supporting violence, but I can understand why they're doing that.
Exactly.
So that's thing. It's not something that I support violence, but I understand if I were to be them, I may do the same thing.
Yeah.
So you get me that thing. So I'm not supporting violence, but I get. The thing is, of course, people say, why you bother about that small piece of land? The Arab countries, you got 20, 30 countries, you can go everywhere. You just go there in peace. So it's not about going there, no. It's not about, say, even the Kaaba. And I think there is in Arab, it's not about the black stone, the Kaaba that we are fighting for. Because basically you are condoning the atrocities and the injustice that you have done to your people.
The idea that the Arabs should go, I heard this actually the other day, my Jewish friends, they say, why don't the Palestinians go? There's so many Arab countries. What are you asking them to leave? Why don't you go back home to where you came from? You know, the Jews came from Europe. Most of the settlers are from Brooklyn, Americans. So they're telling the Palestinians to go somewhere where they've been for thousands of years. It's so offensive. It's so outrageous. The idea that they're all the same Arabs. So why doesn't some Palestinian who's got the house there for hundreds of years, he should go to what, Saudi Arabia? Where should he go?
No, the argument is that they just only have one Jewish state. The Arabs have got so many.
Well,
they call it Arab. They don't get Palestinian.
Yeah.
The Arabs
Well,
go to many Arab
if you
countries.
go back to the beginning, I give talks now about the history of this. Begin in Israel, where it's going to stay. It's not a question of getting rid of Israel, like they say. But, you know, if you wind the clock back, if you rewind the tape and you start again from 1917, Israel shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have been created. It was deceitful behavior of the colonial powers. They gave away part of Palestine, part of the Arab lands to European Jews. They shouldn't have, they had no right to. This was a scandal. This is the history. So if you look at the history, the state of Israel should have never been founded in the first place. And but all states are illegal. Let me say, Australia shouldn't be there. America shouldn't be there. It was always at the expense of the native people. We committed ethnic cleansing everywhere. So it's not saying Israel should now disappear. It's too late for that. Yeah. But they should not blame the Palestinians or claim that the Arabs should go, the Palestinians should go. What gross arrogance and what a racist, awful. This is her country.
I did just add to that because, sorry. Yes,
yeah, Professor, what do you have? What is your opinion on when some people say that Israel is the promised land for the Jews?
Who promised? Who promised? Who promised?
God.
Well, listen.
The first one,
the founding Zionism didn't believe in God. Herzl, the founding Prime Minister Ben Gurion, they didn't believe in God. The leadership, these sophisticated Western guys, they're atheists. In fact, I can't explain that because if you think God told you, God didn't tell anybody.
That is interesting. We'll go. Yes.
Can I have two questions? Can I have two questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I want to seek the opinion of Professor on the issue of first issue of the two-nation state, two-state solution. Would you agree with me or disagree? My point of view is if we look on the cosmological aspect, it's a worldview aspect. We have when it comes to two-state solution, we have the Israelite, the state of Israel now, and outside the state of Israel, there are two worldviews there. Okay, so to those outside Israel, when they talk about the worldview of two-nation state or two-state solution, I think they're very clear. We are very clear what we want from the two-state solution. But I believe from the mindset, from the worldview of the Israelite Zionists in Israel regime, to them the two-state solution is mostly a state of denial and a state of they may think that's what they meant by two-state solution.
Yeah.
when whole world was looking for to the donut, and this Zionists looking at the whole. Technically, okay. The next thing is about you were talking about, the Israelites should go back to Europe.
Well, I'm not really saying that.
The Zionists should go back to Europe.
Well, I'm not really saying that. That's just throwing back the rhetoric to the other side. I'm really not advocating they should go.
Shall I repeat? Basically, why are they establishing a state in the land of where there's people, which call Palestine, but a land of people, where there's people, drive out the people with the land to the land that belong to them.
Yeah.
So here is the point that Europe, the European, created Israel because they don't like the Jews.
Well, it's more complicated. It's more complicated. They created it partly to curry favor with Zionists during the First World War, and it was an attempt to get support from American Jews and others when Britain was involved in the First World War, and they wanted the Arabs to rise up against the Turks, the Ottomans. So it was, but they lied to everybody about it. So the history of it, how they created, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in England, and the motives were complicated. So the history of that's a little bit unclear. Yeah.
All right.
One more.
Please.
A theory about the origins of the current Jewish people.
Yeah.
Which where they were said to come from Khazar.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because I read this from the 13th tribe.
Yeah, that's Arthur Koestler. Arthur Koestler is a brilliant writer. I read a lot of his stuff and I taught some of his works. He wrote the best book on the Galileo affair, which is another story. But he did write this book called The 13th Tribe. And he says, people like me, we have no connection with the Middle East, the European Jews, that there's some other tribe that converted. Look, I'm not a historian, but there's a more recent book by Philip, what was his name? I forgot the name suddenly. There's a recent book by an Israeli author that supports this idea that really the European Jews don't have any genetic or familial historical connection. Look, who knows? I mean, whether that's true or not. I mean, it's kind of shocking if you discover that really you've got no connections. But look, even if I did have a connection, let's say you could trace my family tree all the way back to Moses on that chart there. Let's say, what right does that give me to take a house from a Palestinian? So I'm now, let's say I do have a connection. That's the absurdity, which is very widely held today. The Jews, they're going to their ancestral home. That was the Zionist project. My view is that it gives them no rights to go back to what they had. You know, I make a joke about it when I have slides. I show, listen, you know that Britain was Roman. The Romans occupied all of Britain. So the Italians should now claim they're going back to England. The Italians are going to go back and claim their ancestral home. The Arabs, the whole of the Spanish Iberian Peninsula was Andalus. So now the Arabs are going to go back and take Spain back. That's rubbish. So what crazy claim can you imagine that the Jews as a group should have some historical rights over the people there? That's so silly, and it's indefensible. So in a way, it's very interesting to study these questions. I'm trying to still remember the name of the author of the more recent one. He wrote a book about the apparent origin of European Jews, which may not be from any Middle Eastern source. It may be converts. Maybe it's similar to the Khazar story. It's interesting, but I don't think it should change the picture.
Yeah, I think I wanted to ask you something about your view of the Palestinians. I think they've talked a lot about the Israelis, so now let's talk about Palestinians.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe you can give your opinion on what you think the Palestinians should do are they justified in resisting the occupation, and what do you think they should do?
Yes, look, the answer is yes. They are absolutely justified in resisting the occupation. I'm trying to stand in solidarity with them in resisting. And I have to say, in international law, resisting military occupation, even with armed resistance is justified. I'm not advocating it, but I'm saying in the West Bank, armed resistance against a brutal military is not a crime. So I'm not critical of that at all. I don't think it's necessarily tactically or strategically a good thing. It doesn't help them, I don't think, but that's a different question. I think even, well, look, so that's the first thing, but they have to resist, and we have to find ways to support them to resist national law and finding ways, because that's the strongest weapon we have, and public opinion and BDS and various other means. It's slow, and it's we're up against very, very large forces on the other side. But of course, the Palestinians are a just cause. And that's why around the world, people are standing in solidarity, as they did in other cases, like with South Africa, and like they did with East Timor. In Australia, I was part of activists supporting the East Timor. Again, another brutal occupation, which ended badly, but it ended. And the Palestinian cause is gaining moral support around the world from many places. In Ireland, for example, they're very strong for the Palestinians. So it's a moral cause, it's a just cause. And above all, Jews should stand, because we are, in a way, central to the problem. and we have a kind of a particular responsibility. It's an interesting position to be in, because you can't sit on the fence. You can't be neutral in a case of injustice where we actually are we're not to go back to your question, we're not the victims anymore, we're the perpetrators. And so we have now a special responsibility to speak out.
Anything else? I just want to add to what you said. Once upon a time, Nelson Mandela also used force. They also said he's a terrorist.
Yeah.
By Britain and the rest of the world, until when they liberated, they gave him basically peace fighter in that sense. So that's the politics of the international world. What's happening. I just want to add one thing. When I spoke to Muslim Imran, he's one of the fascinating guy who lived here from West Bank, study doing PhD here. I said, "What do you want?" All peace. So he just said one thing that he wanted on immediate basis. They said no one should live under military control. So that's one. Because once is military control, that you have to go to military checkpoint every day. The father of Yusuf, he asked him to dance. Some people they ask him to straight just to go back to his house. Every day you have to go back and forth. So they will humiliate him. So that's one by the military. At least they got some kind of military code. There's some people who, sorry to say, crazy people in the West Bank, the Jews.
You're so anti-Semitic.
Oh yeah. In that sense, so they said, that this guy also humiliate. He said the person who go back and forth to school or to work, if they pass the security checkpoint, the military checkpoint, they sometimes will be humiliated by the settlers. And sometimes they got guns and everything, also be protected by military. So this kind of thing that you are being humiliated on a daily basis. So are you saying that your daughter being raped, so you give another birth? You cannot. So that's why we understand why they are fighting. I might be one of the fighters if I were to be there, even though we're not advocating for that thing. That's why we're advocating for BDS. We put pressure. We want to talk. Not that we want to talk. At least.
And the slogan is not peace, but peace with justice. Yeah, because it's not enough just to have quiet. It has to be just.
So that's good. That's to end our conversation in that sense. So if you don't got enough, tonight we have another session by Peter SLEZAK in Gerak Budaya. No peace, no justice, no peace. Something like that. Also, he will case for Palestine in Gerak Budaya in PJ. So all are invited 8 p.m. today. And so the last one is on Tuesday. Tomorrow you'll be traveling, visiting Malacca, Malacca. And on Tuesday you're going back to Sydney. Before that, 3 p.m. we got a slot at BFM radio at 3 p.m. So you can watch him live there, radio on Tuesday, 6th of December, and also tonight at Gerak Budaya at 8 p.m. So all come, but also do a live session. So in that case, it's not conversation. We'll give one full lecture on no justice in that sense. So for those who are watching, thank you very much. If you got anything to ask, I can relate to Peter, probably I will email to him. With that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So we go to the next one. Do you want to take a break, Peter?
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. This one is even more interesting. So it's a bit more personal in certain sense. So because when I have Peter, when I interview him, I have to do a bit my research. So that's being me. So I have almost watched all his YouTube video. I just type Peter SLEZAK, whatever Peter SLEZAK, I'll watch.
You're my one fan.
Yeah, no. I'll watch. No, you being professional. We do something, you do that thing. So one thing I've told you, I'm a Grab driver, got plenty of time. So before I go to work, normally whatever the topics that I want to discuss, I'll download first everything.
Good.
So 8-10 hours, I just listen to them. So I just listen to Peter SLEZAK. Anything I want to know, what happened in Sudan, Yemeni, economic, social, anything you want to know. So I film, so I watch. So in that things, apart from Palestine, he's a bit advocate, civilization, philosophy, he also talked about religion or the not civilization religion in that sense. So I watched him debating the Christian, Dr. William Lane Craig's, and as well as the Muslim. I think he spoke to Shahir, I think Irfan something, the two things that I watched.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
So that's the thing. That's why I said, since I'm also the Palestinian activist as well as the interfaith activist, so I thought of it's apt that I interview. So I just give you the context. In Malaysia, we don't really have this kind of I would say intellectual discourse on this kind of thing. So we just because one is probably too sensitive, and second, we don't really have the counterpart to talk to in that sense. So I see you have a very good Shifu professor that can really, said if you believe in something, you need to test your belief.
Of course.
How do you know that you believe in something?
Of course.
Right or not?
I agree.
So that's the thing. But I hope whatever that we discuss is not to win over debate, to that kind of thing. So at least at least I know that I can learn one or two things from you. So how I can benefit from there. I did a lot of from interface and moderating interface dialogue, but it's like I told Peter just now. This from outside, from a point of view that God can make us all equal, one religion, whatnot. But you want to test us equal, so how we believe in that sense. But if there is any dispute, just leave it to God. Don't fight, okay? Just leave it to God. They say. But this guy's okay, and they said, "Trust could be a trial, but you strive while you're still living. You strive to do good things. There are many peoples out there that need our help in many forms, in many times. So, just fighting over this thing, just to me, just really wasting time. It's we got many better things to do. I've watched him how he debated. He said basically, you give your views, and I'll say what's wrong with that. Correct. That's how he sees things. So I have to give my view. I believe, I show you why I believe what I believe, and then probably you can give your views. Correct me if I get it wrong in that sense. Right. Why I believe what I believe. It's interesting. I'm Muslim. One is I was happy before that. I was born and raised as Muslim, as you know, like most of the people here. But after I think program got matured, I asked so many things, and I think I found I choose Islam in a certain sense. I choose Islam. Probably I find answers on certain things. I tend to be happier. I tend to be more peace in that sense. You give me more meanings. You give me more personal directions. You give me strength in that sense. You put my families into perspective and order in that sense. So that's, I know it's a bit personal, and I think you can comment on that. People have their own feelings and how that's it. But I just want to state that I'm happy. That's how I'm doing it. It makes me that's one. Okay. Second thing is, of course, this we have heard from many thieves. Sorry, first cause. I think from I believe the Quran says in Surah II, chapter 52, verses 35-36, "Am khuliqu min ghairi shay'in." Can you come from nothing? God asked us, the human being. I know you give answers to that. That makes me can you come from nothing? Or did you create your own self? Can you create your own self? I mean, if you come from nothing, you can create your own self. You are worthy to be God. You worship in that sense. And God further asked, so who created all these things, all this huge universe? And the best thing, the last word, Bala yukin. We are not certain. So nobody can know us whether where this thing all come from. And so basically, there is a God that claimed I did everything in that sense. Okay, we go to that. Okay, of course, you will. Was the first cause. Okay, I'll just add a little bit. So, who's that God? I said, who's my God? Whoever put me here, that's my God. Whoever the power and whatnot put everything into place, into being, whatever you want to name it, that's just a name, semantic. So basically, that's my God. Put me here. So the same God that I believe I'll go back to whoever put me from nothing. So that time, of course, second is about objective morality. So I believe this is objective morality. Of course, it can be contentious in certain things. I think it's about to be discussed. We can discuss a bit length. But it's something that we can discuss as society. But I believe it's objective morality that you can, I know if you discuss properly, with respectfully, we can make this a better place. Otherwise, without the God thing, you cannot say, what is right and wrong in that sense, especially about selfishness. It's my body. What am I to do? If there's some people who just gambling. Some people who believe in God go to the temple church, but they open a bar, stuff like that. You go to gamble and stuff like that. So those kind of vice that I know some people also they have, but I think Islam, in a certain sense, is a bit comprehensive in certain things. So what is right? If you want to take, okay, there is also the repercussion. We'll go into that. I know. Yeah, the thing is that it provides. In certain sense, studied all other religion in that sense. Most of them a bit more on the faith side, but I believe Islam, they got a balance between the faith and the reason that I can talk to you in certain sense. Also not that, but it gives me comprehensive way of life, that every morning I should still say thank to God and 5 times prayer, that sense of brotherhood and the purpose in life in Islam is basically belief in that God. I'll go into that. Basically, this in Surah Wal-As, by time, most of people are in state of loss and grief. Except for those who believe in God. So, and he said, if you believe, you must do good. You believe, but you must do good things. So 10% of doing good, probably there is the ritualistic that you have to do, fasting, praying or not. And the 90% is basically be the better version of yourself, like yourself, like him, a gardener, whatever. Whatever that you have within your constraint ability, do your best. So that's basically all part of it. Our life is part of worshiping in that sense. So yeah, by doing that, I think this one can make this world a better place in that sense, because your purpose in this world. And talking about purpose, also I've thought a lot about purpose. And this tab defines one function, purpose. It must be something, the creator that invent, that knows what the true functions of this thing. So I believe God said, put you here, you must do good things and spread that goodness. Or I support Wamil Solihat, Watawasaw bil Haq. In Islam, that one thing that they ask us, that's why I probably want to bring it, apart from do good thing, you must spread the truth. You must spread goodness to the humanity in that sense. So that's why probably I'm doing this thing to you. And Watawasaw bil Haq, and you enjoin each other to stay on the right path, probably until you die. So the purpose in this world is basically to do king. And again, probably the last one is 6 reasons. Probably there are many, but I think this is enough. For this 1 hour, is basically I have that sense of ultimate justice in this world. There are many things that I cannot explain why things happen the way it happened. Even for the cause of Palestine, Israel, why things happen, why happened to that Israel? They were persecuted by the terror or whatnot. Why that thing happened? So at least in certain sense, at least give me answer in that sense. They'll get some, so in certain sense, it's a bit logical in the sense that, we die and the evil got scot-free in that sense without any, the people who do good things, you just, so that is basically, sorry if I may, so that's my case, so probably you can better my view in a sense. Complete my view.
Is there a question there? Yes. What's the question?
That's basically because from your point of view, normally you said, I'll give my reason why I believe in the existence of God. So these are the 6 reasons.
Fine.
Why I believe in my version of God. Probably normally in I saw your debate or your dialogue, normally that person has to give their justification for believing such and such, but you say why that thing's wrong. If I be more direct in that sense.
So you're asking me why I don't share your views?
Yeah, you want to share your view, yeah.
Well, look, I don't know if I should go through each one of your doctrines, but I can tell you my own position, which is a contrast to yours.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, there are a lot of religions in the world. And David Hume, famous philosopher I studied, a famous British philosopher, Scottish philosopher, he said, look, they're all contradicting each other. They can't all be right. So if you just look at all the religions. And so, as you say, I've enjoyed debating with a lot of significant figures in the Christian and Muslim traditions. And actually, they're very similar. The reasons that, with some differences, the Muslim theologians, the imams and the figures who profess the religion, they will give arguments that are very similar to the Christians about the creation of the world, about religion, about ethics, the basis for morality. Okay, so as an atheist, I can explain my view of the world and why I don't share those reasons. Look, it's very simple, actually. I have a scientific view of the world. I believe, I can put it in a slogan, whatever the best science tells me, I believe it. I mean, that's a cheap, simple slogan, but it sums up the difference. Firstly, science is complete, certain. There's a lot of room for doubt, but that's what makes science powerful, because everything's open to question. And when you are open to question, you find out that some things you believe turn out to be wrong, and you have to be able to change your mind then. Now, most believers in most religions aren't as open-minded as that, because there's some fundamental tenets of the religious system that they can't be open about. So, for example, if I argue with I argued with some devout, priests or Catholic friends, one of the things that's not open for them, seriously open, is whether God exists. That's kind of a basic tenet of their belief, and I don't think they're really open about the possibility that maybe they're wrong. In the case of a priest, for example, I'm close friends with some very significant priests. It's not an option for him in his life, realistically, psychologically, one day to decide, you know what, I think I'm wrong about this. I'll take off my priest clothes and I'll become a civilian. So I think people have deep commitments, and look, everybody does. But the principle of science is that nothing is immune from criticism. Now, in practice, it's very hard. In fact, in the history of science, in the philosophy of science, one of the most famous books was written in 1962 by Thomas Kuhn, called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he points out that scientists are also pretty dogmatic. Sometimes Einstein was committed to certain views, but it's not the individual, it's the institution of science where everything's revisable. And today, quantum physics is so different from classical physics, nobody would have dreamt, but we changed. And relativity theory, what Einstein invented, it's so crazy that nobody previously could have accepted it. So it turns out that the institution of science can revise the most fundamental beliefs. Nothing is above criticism. So that's a shorthand way of saying, look, the best science is what I believe. It could be wrong. Tomorrow we find out that we're wrong about a lot of things. But currently we have overwhelmingly strong reasons to believe a lot of things about the world. Amazingly, the modern science has come to a conclusion about how the whole universe began. We couldn't have dreamt that that was even a possible understanding that the best science can give us. Einsteinian relativity theory, Big Bang cosmology, we now know as certain as anything we've ever known in science that the whole universe came into existence 14.5 billion years ago. It's an amazing idea. I've debated with theologians, with Craig, about where did the Big Bang come from? That's a whole debate. But that's an interesting question. Craig wants to take one step beyond science because he believes in God. Science just tells you what the best we know about what happened 14.5 billion years ago. You can't go back before. Actually, you know why you can't go back before? There was no before, because time began. Don't ask me what it means. You have to go to the physics books and show the space-time graphs and how everything comes to a singularity. That's physics. But it's like when I go to the doctor. I'm not going to argue with the doctor about the best of modern. It could be wrong next week. We find out something new. But currently, we don't have a better access to truth and reality than our best science. It's fallible, it's debatable, but somehow we've acquired the most extraordinary understanding of the universe. Biology, chemistry, we know about atoms, we know about physiology. That's my faith. If you have to say whether people say, I have a faith, well, sort of, but it's a rational faith. And I think that we can come to rational beliefs by applying the best way we know how to acquire rational beliefs, which is through evidence and argument and logic. We don't have better than that. Now, we may not agree about some things because there's room always for disagreement. But that doesn't lead me to accept any of the religious traditions as more plausible than an atheist view. And you said you're happy. You know what? I'm jealous. I wish I had your view, because I'm not happy.
You're not happy.
No, what I mean is, my view is not emotionally as satisfying as, let's say, some of the religious faiths about heaven and God and stuff. That's comforting for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't want to take away anybody's comfort, but I can't share it. So I don't share that. I'm stuck with... Now, I read Bertrand Russell when I was 16, and Bertrand Russell wrote some beautiful essays about what it means. I give it to my students. What it means to be an atheist who believes in science. At first, it seems like an unfriendly universe, but he explains from the point of view of a deep scientist and mathematician and intellect, what is the meaning of life to an atheist? That's Bertrand Russell's famous essays. He has an essay called What I Believe and Why I'm Not a Christian, and these essays. And I read them when I was 16 years old, and that struck me as the most plausible view based on a scientific worldview. So that's my general scheme. And so that doesn't answer certain questions. It doesn't answer the questions of ethics. That's a whole separate question. Where do you get your values from? I studied ethics as a philosophy student. There's a whole literature about the basis of morality. I'm a utilitarian, roughly speaking. And it's the formula for utilitarian is the right thing, the right action is that which provides the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Now, it's not a bad formula for life, because it has problems. It's problematic in some ways,
yeah.
But as a guide generally. So in my approach to life, it's basically a scientific creed, that you have a rational approach to evidence and argument and reason. And that's the Enlightenment view from the 18th century. That was a movement in France and elsewhere. The Enlightenment is a kind of a model for what I think is a good life and a rational life. And Bertrand Russell is my kind of hero. He said a good life is the life that's, I can't remember exactly, guided by love and informed by truth. Something like that. He made a slogan that I think is guided by love, which is, I think, the basis for real morality. And many of the religions are based in love for your fellow human. So it's not that I disagree with much of the religious traditions. I can agree with in the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, and in Islam. There are many. In fact, Galileo had a struggle with the church over exactly this. I studied and taught Galileo, and he had to explain to the Catholic Church at the time. He got into big trouble because he was teaching some scientific views which were contrary to the Christian Bible, in fact, in the Old Testament. And he explained what we have to understand is the Bible teaches us how to live. It's about faith and morals, it's not a textbook. It's not a scientific textbook. And I have the same discussion with my Muslim friends. Many of them want to explain how science really should understand the world based on Islamic principles. I think that's the wrong way around. That's my own view, because I think the world, and as we understand it, is best known through our best science. And in fact, the Catholic Church came to, I think, the right solution. Where it appears to contradict the Holy Scriptures, then you have to reinterpret the Scriptures. That's what the Catholic Church came to after Galileo, because there appeared to be things which the Scriptures said which were mistaken. So that meant we didn't understand it properly. That was Galileo's formula to the Catholic Church, how the Church Fathers should understand that, yes, the Bible is an important document. It's the Word of God, but it's about faith and morals, how to live one's life. And I think that's right. I share that.
Can I?
Please, you can argue back.
Okay. One thing is that I don't find anything that from Muslim point of view that I cannot disagree with you. No, basically, it's all perfectly fine, except for, like I said, based on science, whatnot. It's just that, like utilitarian theories and whatnot. It's just that one thing that I think is false shots, if I may, using scientific. Because scientific is just it's based on empirical studies. You need to explain something, It's just that, of course, we must be humble enough to say there are certain things probably there is no answer,
Exactly. That's the scientific attitude.
I mean, so that's in where probably you call it God of the gap and all. So why don't we just, there must be something that put us here, that is God. Okay, that is one. So unless you can argue that if you believe in that, there is the bad consequences that it can bring to the humanity. That's one. Second, I think from whatever the philosophy that you've been reading all this while, I think from my short reading is that there are many from the history with the Christian theology and whatnot. So we have that kind of problem. In Islam, we don't have so much problem with the scientific, whatever that you may call it. In fact, that one is just to help us. Just one small part of it. I think there is nothing in science that contradict whatever that we believe in the Quran and whatnot. I mean, I don't want to be going to some other religion and pointing out what that is not in line with
Sure.
in our religion. But it's just that I think, so there is, before I say we finding God in that sense, through our empirical studies, whatnot, but can you just that God put us here? There is one God put us here. Look, then you go and do your research, whatnot, and God asks us to do good things, okay, and spread the truth and whatnot, So is that not too much to us in that sense?
It's too much to ask.
No. One thing that I like about Islam is like that this unity of God in that sense. So who's your God? God I put here, so everyone can share that thing. There's no like my God is some name X, monkey, whatever. Who's your God? My God is whoever put us here. That's our God. Can we not agree to that?
No.
Come on, people. So I'm not finished that. That is one. That is unity of God in that sense. Second is unity of universality of brotherhood. So one God that all of us are the same. We worship.
But I have the universal brotherhood of men without having God. I share humanity.
Yeah,
I don't need God to tell me that.
Yeah, I'm not finishing that.
Okay.
That's
Sorry.
called unity of. No, it's okay. It's okay. Unity of God. Second.
Yeah.
Under God. Under God. We are supposed to be able to do good things, do good things.
I agree with
so
that.
How do you find good? So we can have discussion.
But the unity of mankind comes from biology. It comes from the fact that we're all one species. That's simple. That's simple. We're all the same. So we're human beings. That's not a problem. And we know where we came from, by the way. I mean, we evolved.
Yeah, well, I just want to add a few things because some other people say they believe their religion is only for that X group of people. I cannot be very direct. Judaism is they are chosen, so we so it has to be equal in that across the board. The religion must be for all people. Universality, that's so much. One God, all people.
Yeah, but what do you do with people who don't believe in your God? So let's say some people, the Indian, you have to explain to me the Indian, they have 100 gods. What are you going to tell them?
Oh yeah. So that's also a very good question. Very good question. I also asked about that question.
But how do you convince somebody?
Yeah.
When I gave my lectures debating with these religious believers, I said to William Lane Craig, I said to the audience, there were 3,000 Christians in the audience. It was an interesting moment. And I said, listen, you're all atheists. Let's say I believe in Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican god. I always use that line. And I said, you don't believe in Quetzalcoatl, you're all atheists.
Yeah.
So you don't believe in any other gods except one. I'm just consistent. I don't believe in any of them. So people understand the reason to be an atheist. You don't believe in Quetzalcoatl either. So what are you going to say to the Mexican? He believes there's one God.
I know. That's the thing. This is where we differ. I think that's the difference between all other religions. So the moment that you say the Mexican God is God, so he has to come out with the proof, an undisputable proof that is
not
God.
Undisputable, but let's say. Okay.
Let's say probably Christianity say that's a God. So you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt.
They have lots of proofs. They have lots of proofs.
No, the thing is, you can prove to me. You can prove to me, to other people. It's up to you. The Christian, the Hindu, whatever. Bring me the proof. Okay, so that's one. I'm not finished in that sense. No, this is not about winning a debate here.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
No. Don't get me. I don't care whether I'm losing.
So we can agree to disagree, but we can't both be right.
Correct. I'm totally agree. It's not about that. The thing in Islam is like, God says, if The thing is, that's why in Islam there are three questions. The three more important questions we must ask ourselves for any living human being. That is, who are we? Where do we come from? So we came from nothing. So the second question, what's supposed to be doing this world? You just come here, just do. I follow you, you follow me. Just go drinking, go whatever. There is no like, you think what's right. The third thing is this is so bit different from you and me. Where do you go from here? So logically speaking, where you're coming from, you should go back to the same source, whoever that put you here in the first place. You cannot come here just doing whatever you like. So come to the question of God. There's so many gods, probably 10,000 gods in Wikipedia that I checked. Probably about 20 is the biggest one, history and whatnot. So to me, if they say that is God, so bring me that proof. Because okay, they can come up with whatever proof they want. So on the day of judgment, God says, you will speak to that God. So you don't come to me, you go to that God. Right? Don't ask from me. Ask from that God, because you said that's a God. Why you ask from me? So what my position is more like atheist position in that sense, in a certain sense. Because my God is whoever puts me here, that's a God. And further, probably in the surah Ikhlas, he said, God must be one. Otherwise, there is no absolute God. God will be fighting Thor and Loki. Will be havoc in this world and God fighting. Allah Samad, God must be eternal. That's me. God must be uncaused. I think you heard about that. Otherwise, who's create that God? So to be infinite regression and whatnot. Lam yalid wa lam yulad is basically God's not created, nor is created. Otherwise, there's too many God, baby God, Father God, one. So that will create not the absoluteness of the one God. And lastly, it's super important. There's nothing unto like God. If you say, I dream, I found God, so that's false. So in this world, as much as possible, we can discuss like you and me. So no one can say, I have the truth. You have the truth. So we ask ourselves, we ask Iman. So whatever the position that you take is that things make this world a better place, make this thing happy or peace for yourself and for the world. So that's my argument. Of course, my stance, I think, in certain sense, give me strength and peace, can also make this world a better place. And I have that hedge. No, shoot, there is no God, I'm quite okay, just like you and me. But if there is God, you and
I'm in big trouble if there's God.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble, I know. Look, you ask for proof for the other guy, but that's my point. There are lots of arguments for God's existence in Islam and in Christianity. With my students, to show you how even-handed I am, when I taught a course on the philosophy of religion. Yeah, and so I mean, there were mainly Christians in the class, but that's where the Muslims came and they invite me to debate. But to be perfectly fair, I mean, I'm very religion, but some teachers like to pretend, and I don't want them to agree with me. That's why I tell them my view so that they can argue with me. That's the point. But in my class, I gave my students the best arguments for religion, for God. I gave them a book of different believers, Jewish, Christian, and there are arguments for God, famous arguments. The cosmological argument, which the Muslims also accept, that where did we come from? The creation of the universe. That's what William Lane Craig argues.
Yeah.
And there's the teleological argument that's to do with the purpose. There are certain purposes in the universe. There's a whole understand what's a good argument, what's a bad argument. Now, okay, so there are arguments, but they're not all good. There's the famous cosmological proof of Anselm. Anyway, look, it's a very interesting exercise intellectually to go through honestly, open-mindedly, to consider the strongest points. That's the only appropriate way to consider not the weakest arguments, but the strongest arguments. So I would give my students the best arguments I could find on the religious side. Now, I happen just not to agree with them. I think that there are not good grounds for any of those arguments. So if you can come up with a better one, I'll be very happy. But at the moment, in my own enough. So you see, you're right when you say nothing is certain. That's my view. But some things are more probable than others.
So what's that?
Well, for example, the structure of water is H2O. We know a lot about the chemistry and the biology of the body. We know what the kidney does. They didn't know this in early days. We know a lot now.
So what's that thing got to do with Islam? So the best that science can do is explain how that things work, not why that thing's in that sense.
No, there's no why. It's why. It's a bit ambiguous. Look, it explains the world, the physical universe. That thing exists. That's a claim. Science. That's science's business. Science is not silent on these claims. You can't claim that something exists, but science doesn't know about it. I mean, science doesn't know about a lot of things, but then it's your point. Then Bertrand Russell said it. Then we can't know it.
Okay, I just add another verse from why I had that face. It's from Surah 67. I was basically God created life, and that's to test us. Which one of us can do the best of whatever evidence that we have?
That's
We're
right.
better human beings. One of the thing I've watched Aristotle said we got this ergon arete arguments that use your functions that you have better than the animals and living being. Is basically your intellect, your rational, as well as language that we use, including our purpose and why we are here, where you're coming from. So I think as long as we live, I think we should have this kind of discussion.
I agree. That's why I do it all the time.
Yeah, that's why you're doing it here. So without in fact, there is also another verse in Quran in Surah 49, verse 13, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa unsa. I created you from male and female. Basically, for us, they created into pairs, into tribes and races, for us to know each other. And the best among you is the righteous man, the pious man. And God says, God is all-knowing. It's not for us to say, I'm good, better than you and say, no. For us to know each other, for us probably to help each other, for have this. And the best among you, inside of God, is God, not you and me. So that's whole thing. I thought it's a bit universal in that sense, And I leave it to the floor. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm just explaining, I say the objective, you know where I'm coming from. Me, I'm not representing Islam, not how I understand Islam. What makes me happy inside. What you answer certain question that probably you don't have answered. I'm quite happy to have that. And also it helps me, I'm happy here. Probably I'm quite at peace when I was to die. I think that's a big difference between 40 years back and now that I have that thing, some kind of insurance.
Sure.
Yeah, and my life's no better than you. Yeah, I leave it to the floor. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. But I think you talk too much and you don't give a chance.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You can run away. Share. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, just joking.
No problem.
No hard feeling. All right.
Sure.
We're talking about boycott apartheid Israel.
Yeah.
And we are talking a lot about why the Zionists should be more peaceful and loving and kind, as all other human beings. They evolved from apes. Yeah. So here we are. Let's talk about Mother Teresa. Let's talk about Hitler killing all the Jews, or Pol Pot killing the killing field, and people died. Hitler died, Pol Pot died, Mother Teresa died. So what's the purpose of coming into this world for Hitler? Just come and shoot people, Pol Pot come and shoot people and just die, and then Mother Teresa come here and help people, and then they all die and become dust, and no more apes. So how do you figure that in terms of justice to these people, and to the human being that they kill, to the Jews they kill? What's your opinion on this?
I'm not sure what the question is. What's the question?
Huh?
What's the question exactly?
The question is, if they just come and exist, born and die, and in between they kill people or help people, what's the purpose of existing at all? I mean, we are talking about accountability, justice, and
Look, you can't ask that question because if you're here, there's no point asking what's the purpose of being here. You make the best you can. You make the happiest life you can for yourself and for others. So there's a lot of terrible things going on in the world. Okay, a lot of people do human nature is complicated and people are cruel to one another. So you pick all these bad guys, Hitler and so on. I don't have an answer to you know, the global source of evil and harm, but it's real. Okay, so we do the best we can. We try to, within our power, to improve things.
How do people decide the best, the right or the wrong? How do people decide? Where does this decision come from?
From you. It's your choice. Yeah. You can't. I mean, you have a tradition. You have Islam. You have most of the religious traditions actually give you some good advice. They have quite good. The problem is to observe the edicts, the precepts.
Let's put Islam away. Put Islam,
yeah.
or Judaism or Hindu
yeah.
away. We talk about humankind. We talk about people becoming mankind, yeah, out of components getting together, you know, accidentally, conveniently, all this oxygen, nitrogen, all the biology, suddenly become humankind. And suddenly you decided, no, Israel is not doing the right thing. You know?
But look,
where does this moral come from?
Look, human beings have developed societies, and a lot of social, political philosophers have talked about, like Hobbes and others, how human beings can live together despite the fact we have a nature that is not kind and generous. Hobbes is a famous philosopher in the British tradition who wrote about the state of nature, where we're all animals and we behave selfishly and we do harm to others for our own interest. And he said, we make a contract. That's how society works. So part of the answer to your question is that implicitly we agree to live together to abide by certain rules, which means I will give up my right to steal and to do terrible things if you give up your right. And so we live together in harmony because we give up our right to be selfish and steal and do terrible things. And that creates harmony. That's not a bad theory. There are many theories of social contract. So this is a theory of how, given human nature, given a certain human nature, we can come to live in harmony under a certain kind of consensus, a contract it's called. It's a social contract theory. I'm not a political philosopher, so I can't talk in a great deal of sophisticated ways about it. But the idea is a pretty reasonable one, that we agree implicitly to abide by the rules. We all drive in this country like in Australia on the left. It's a good idea. If you want to break that tradition, you're going to be in trouble. So we abide by certain conventions for the common good. Well, that's one answer. It's a rational solution to dealing with what are the difficulties of human nature. Maybe if Hobbes is right, he has a phrase, in the state of nature, it's a war of all against all. If we were left to our state before society established the contract, we would be fighting with each other all the time. It's not a bad picture of human nature. So it's sort of answering your question. And it's a rational solution that we agree with each other and we inculcate these values to live in harmony, and more or less sort of works. And we have laws and we have principles that are passed down through our religious and other traditions, how to live in harmony. Well, that's a rational solution. And actually, you don't need God for that. You don't need a religion for that. Every society comes up. Now, they may justify it by certain traditions that the law was handed down. But whether you accept that or not, even if you're an atheist, you can agree that there's a rational reason to abide by certain rules of conduct. That makes sense. So that's why we get on. And it's a good idea. It's not a bad answer.
If I can just add to that, what my point is, basically, we come to term left, right, whatever. But it just, there is certain things, even Palestinian issue, there is that innocent people got killed or made
sure.
Stalin and whatnot. So at least for the theist, this Muslim, there is that afterlife that people will make just of whatever the injustice that is world.
A lot of people stopped believing for that reason. After the Second World War, a lot of people stopped believing. And one of the arguments for God is the argument from evil. It's one of the most difficult arguments for a believer, Christian, Muslim, Jewish. If God is all loving, how come there's so much bad stuff going on? And that's not an easy one to answer if God is a good God, a kind God, because a lot of bad things happen. And if God is omnipotent, so I've had these arguments with theologians. If he's omnipotent, we don't have to get into theology argument here, but it's a difficult question for a believer to answer your question, how much harm and suffering in the world, so-called evil. That's a traditional debate in theological circles, how to reconcile the reality of Pol Pot or whoever, or Hitler, with God's will. How can God will the world to be like this? That's the puzzle.
But, Professor, when it comes to evil, people are blaming God. Why God not allow evil? But do you see all evil in this world? Pol Pot does not live forever. Hitler does not live forever. There are still good people, peaceful people like Mother Teresa, whatever it is. So there is other coin. There are also people who are doing good things. So why don't we thank God for that?
Well, but then he's to blame for the bad and also for the good. So you have to credit him the good and the bad.
So here we are focusing on the negative part, you know.
Yeah.
That's why we see, why God's negative. All this evil in this world, all these bad people, kind of people in the world, is because of themselves, not because of God.
That's one of the arguments. That's right. Well, we better not go too far into this debate, but that's one of the defenses against the argument from evil, because we have free will. Yeah. So that's one. I have to tell you, I think it's a bad argument, but that's what we do in the class. We go through the arguments and what conclusion do you come to? So yeah, it's a long. There's a whole tradition of this. Please.
Okay.
Please.
Me first.
Are you first?
Have you always been an atheist, or there's certain points in your life where you were previously religious and suddenly?
Look, I wasn't brought up in a religious house, so my parents weren't believers. So I didn't get taught and didn't go to Sunday school or religious classes. A lot of my fellow Jews and others went. So I was left alone. I didn't get educated or brainwashed, if you might say. I didn't get anything at home. I had a religious ceremony when I was 13 years old. Jewish boys do what's called a bar mitzvah. So I did that, but and I learned to read Hebrew. But so if you ask me so I probably sort of believed something, but then I was 16 and I read Bertrand Russell. Then I became an atheist.
Was there any specific event that happened to you that actually changed your mind? Like, I don't know, maybe some traumatic event psychologically?
You want to psychoanalyze me? Did I have a trauma in my life that made me an atheist? But some people did. Some people went through the Second World War and they said, if God can do this, I'm out, out of here. I don't believe in God. I didn't have no, for me it was a rational matter. I didn't start, look, I had a Jewish friend. I can tell you the relevant argument. So he was a very, very ultra-Orthodox Jewish guy. I still know him. And we were kids together. And in school once, I remember I said to him, you only believe in God because you were brought up in this ultra-Orthodox Jewish family. And he said to me, but I was brought up in an atheist family, so it's the same. And I didn't know what to answer. I thought that's a good answer, but it wasn't a good answer. Only much later I realized the difference is my parents didn't give me Bertrand Russell to remember by heart. I didn't get the atheist books to read and to remember. I was just left alone. So it's not symmetrical. He got brainwashed. I mean, he got an education. Let me put it more politely. Yeah, more politely. But really, because from an early age, he had to go to religious classes. He had to learn to read and stuff. I got nothing. I was left alone. So when I went to school and I learned, and I went to religion school classes of religion, but I was more or less, it was easier for me. So it's the opposite of having a traumatic experience. I didn't have any experience that steered or directed my thinking. I was just figuring it out. And when I was 16, I learned science, which was really interesting. And then I read Bertrand Russell, his famous essay, Why I'm Not a Christian. Now, of course, he was Christian, but he was an atheist. And he gave really good arguments. And I thought, that's pretty good. So that's my personal journey, where I just read stuff that I found plausible. And on ethics as well. So for me, I had certain influences. And by the way, I often mention this, it's an interesting connection. When I was 16, I read Bertrand Russell and so on. It's not an accident later in life. When I got to know Chomsky, if you've ever seen a picture of Chomsky in his office, he's got an old guy on the wall. You know whose picture he's got on the wall? Bertrand Russell. Because Bertrand Russell was also a moral hero. He was not only an intellectual hero, he marched in the street against the bomb, against the war, against the Vietnam War. He went to jail, and he was an activist. And he got out of the ivory tower, and he engaged in political life. He didn't just sit in his office at the university. So Chomsky admires Russell for his, not only for his intellectual contributions and capacity and genius, but for his moral engagement and political engagement. So that's, now Chomsky says nobody's a hero, but some people are more admirable than others. And so it was an interesting path that as a teenager I discovered Russell, and then later I discovered Chomsky. So on the political, well, you could call it that, but look, he's a wise human being who it's sort of all the questions I was trying to answer are the answers Bertrand Russell would give. Science, it's not perfect, but it's the best we have, and a rational person appeals to the best evidence. A wise, this is a quote from David Hume, actually, the father of the Anglo-American tradition, the empiricist tradition, and I quote this whenever I give a debate. This is verbatim from Hume. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. That's a pretty simple formula. Now, it's not that simple, but it's not a bad slogan, how you balance the evidence. That's when I said to William Lane Craig, I don't believe in miracles, because Hume gave the argument against miracles. So that's the personal approach. No, you're
so what kind of proof you see fit to prove the existence of God?
What kind of proof do you see fit? Good question. I get asked that. What would convince me, if I'm open-minded, right? What would convince me to believe in God?
I mean, what kind of proof?
Yeah, what kind? There's got to be a good one.
May come to you and say, you know, the existence of the earth, the planet, the creation, everything.
Yeah, that's just science.
So that's the basis on creation, and that doesn't convince you.
No.
So what type of evidence?
It's a good question.
What type of evidence can convince you?
Good question. I owe you an answer to that one. It has to be very good proof, I got to tell you, because it's got to, in the balance, it's got to out. So, I mean, I could think of something. If I started to say, look, I need a really good miracle, you better do something really dramatic. So 5 minutes from now, I want to be sitting on the pyramid in Egypt. I don't know, put a pyramid here in the middle of Kuala Lumpur or something. So I'm asking to prove that, look, I'm making silly jokes, but the reason I'm saying, and you know what, if I saw something like that, I still wouldn't believe. You know why? I think, you know what, I had too much to drink this morning. I had too much alcohol. I must have had too much beer. I know you guys don't drink beer, but you know, so I think, you know, maybe my mind is playing tricks, because this is crazy. That happens. If I see something that's too unlikely, I'm not going to say, it must be a miracle. I'm going to say, you know what, I'm seeing things, you know? So it's a difficult question, because there's such a strong weight of evidence that I rely on. I would need something that shifted the balance. Now, it's a fair question, and I'm not sure what would be personally enough to shift the balance. But if consistently science, see, the trouble is science is open-minded, that if something happened that is unexpected, as it happens, I talk about so-called miracles in science. We often just, in science, they're called anomalies. Things happen that you didn't expect, the science didn't predict, but then you try to understand them, and then you build it into your science, because science is not fixed. That's the whole point about being open-minded. So if it turned out there was evidence that I'm wrong, that there is a God, I would believe in God, because then the evidence shifted. So it's got to be good evidence. You know, I mean, so you could make up, I'm trying to imagine what would be evidence for a monotheistic God. If you ask me about an Indian God, I don't know the answer to that. Or Quetzalcoatl, you know, it depends on which God you want me to believe in. So, you know, if Ganesh would come from India, I don't know which God. You tell me which God.
Yeah. Ladies.
You please. Is it his turn? It's your turn.
I have 2 questions.
You can have 2.
Okay, just 2 questions.
You can have more.
My first question is a simple one. What is your opinion and what do you know about dark matter?
About?
Dark matter.
Dark matter.
Dark matter?
Dark matter, yeah.
I'm not a physicist. Don't ask such a hard question from me. That's not fair. No, but that's a good question. But you got to go get a physics book and read the best popular. I used to read a lot of. I started a science degree, but I moved to sociology and philosophy. But I read a lot of popular science, good, serious science, to understand what is the best stories. Now, there's a lot of writers, I can tell you their names because I follow them, who tell you the best science and explain it so a non-physicist can understand. I want to understand dark matter. I want to understand, how, what's the word, the quantum physics theory of when two electrons go into two ends of the universe, they can talk to each other. But that's the best physics. This two slit experiment in quantum physics, wonderful stuff. What's the word? I'm looking for the word in quantum physics where everything's connected. There's a word for that. Doesn't matter. But it's a very good question. And it's the best question because that's what our best science is telling us. The things we don't understand exactly, the universe doesn't make sense at the moment. Some things about the gravity and the amount of matter doesn't explain everything. That's the best science. So it's a great question, but I'm not the one to ask. What's the other question?
Okay, it's your personal journey. Okay, the existential question from how you came from where you were and where you are now here today. I mean, the purpose of life. I mean, for Muslims, it's quite clear lah. But how will you answer why you are here on earth? Do you have a personal opinion on this?
Yeah. Look, if you're an atheist and you believe in science, what does science tell me? Science tells me the universe was created 14 billion ago, the atoms are floating around, evolution happened, and here I am. And afterwards, nothing. I told you I didn't like it. It's not, but that's what I think is the best story.
So what is your philosophy then? You've read a lot of philosophy. How do you philosophize on this?
What does the question mean? I don't get it.
I mean, we are creatures that we need to know. We need comfort in our to know.
Yeah, but that's a psychological problem. You have to go to the psychiatrist. He's the psychiatrist. You need psychological help. I can't give you that. The truth may not be comfortable. That's like in politics. If I'm telling that crazy guy, you're wrong, he doesn't like it. It's not comfortable. The truth hurts. Okay. So I'm not in the business of giving you comfort. That's why I told you about Bertrand Russell. He has that essay where he explains at first it's not so comfortable, but you come to terms with it. It seems to be the truth. So I think I've got this scientific honesty where you confront what appears to be the most story. But there's more to it. If you ask what's the meaning of life, I talk about this as well. So what's the meaning of life? It's a funny question. Look, I have a wonderful family. I love my family. I love my work. The meaning of life comes from within my life, not from outside. This is one of the issues. For a lot of people who are believers, they think that God gives them the meaning of their life. Some philosophers wrote about this. If you don't believe in that, the meaning... I read philosophy, I love science, I love certain other things. The meaning comes from within one's life. During life, afterwards, I don't want to think about it. But you understand my point. A meaningful life, Bertrand Russell again has a nice saying. He said, life is no less happy or meaningful because it comes to an end. I'm enjoying this conversation, more or less. Well, what I'm saying is that doesn't mean it's not real because it comes to an end. Soon we'll go to lunch. In other words, my children, I love my children and my grand. That's meaningful. No, it's not eternal. I don't believe in eternity, but it's real. I love playing tennis sometimes, and okay, you understand. Yes. And I love reading and writing, and doing stuff which gives me. Everybody has a different story because everybody has a different satisfaction. We do different things. Okay, and everybody finds meaning in their life. Now, that's the only answer I've got. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Your turn.
Okay, my turn. So anyway, Professor, it's interesting to hear your views on religion and Islam, because if you're not aware, I've been involved in apologetics. This is my channel, the Muslim Apologist.
Yes, of course.
So I've debated religions. I debated atheists. Some atheists were very pleasant to talk to. Some were downright
unpleasant. Absolutely.
Very nasty.
I agree with you.
Okay, so I would say that you fall within the nice.
Who are the bad guys? Which one? Dawkins.
I'm going to touch on that.
Yeah.
This is not related to the questions I want to ask, but maybe perhaps we can have a talk later. We can discuss whether we can have like an online discussion.
Yeah.
Like that in the future. So anyway, going to my question. Okay. Questions. Sorry. The first question is you raised the issue of there may be other gods that are valid, right, in other religions as well. So that actually brings me to one interesting point about Islam, which is we Muslims believe that there is a primordial religion. Okay, this primordial religion existed since. Because I know you don't believe in Adam, but we believe that Adam was the first person to adopt this religion, and this religion has been passed down throughout his progeny, right, until today. Okay, and because of the conflict and the differences between men, therefore men were broken up into tribes and peoples and everything. So some of these people, they divert from the true primordial religion, which we believe was brought by Adam, and this is why we see what you mentioned, which is the Mexican religion, the Hindus, the whatever, right? So what I want to ask, the first question is, would you say that maybe perhaps the true answer to the problems of this world is actually monotheism, this true primordial religion that we should maybe refer to? Doesn't necessarily, I mean, you may say, okay, maybe it's not Islam, maybe it's not Judaism, maybe it's not even Christianity whatsoever, but perhaps it's would you maybe agree or disagree with me to say that this idea of monotheism is actually more plausible than polytheism or atheism? Okay?
Look, I don't think it's more plausible, to be honest. I mean, I don't believe, but
okay,
but
that's the first question, right? So now this is the second question.
Well, let me answer the first question first.
Okay, all right. Okay,
one at a time. So it's not quite answering your question, but if there was monotheism, if everybody believed this, it's not. But would it be better?
Yeah.
No, because people find all sorts of reasons to hate one another and kill one another, so in a way, to be honest, I think even if everybody was, Christians find reasons to hate one another. Probably Muslims too. They don't all agree.
Yeah.
So if it was the solution to the problems of the world to believe in the same thing, it would be very nice. But I'm not so optimistic. So that's not quite your question, but that's the best answer I can give. Because, but to the other question, just to elaborate a bit, I don't find monotheism any more plausible than polytheism. The Greeks had Zeus on Olympus, and they had really very colorful religion. The gods did all sorts of funny stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, now I don't think anybody believes that anyway, but it's very interesting religion, and they interacted with human beings, and I don't find that any less plausible. I mean, I think it's all just it goes back to what's a proof, what's evidence, what's an argument, and if the arguments are no, so I don't think monotheism is intrinsically more plausible, because the plausibility depends on what arguments, what evidence. Why is one more plausible than two? I mean, the Christians are complicated because they've got three and it's one. But, don't ask me to explain that. But, they have a story to tell. I don't get it. So please.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, so the second question is actually related to what you asked me regarding those nasty atheists, right?
Yeah.
So basically, these are the proponents of what we refer to as new atheism.
That's it. That's Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris. Sam Harris is the worst.
Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett.
I know that. Daniel Dennett is a very good philosopher, by the way. He's a very important philosopher in my field. The most important philosopher.
So actually, quite and the position is that the world is a better place if all religions are wiped out and replaced with new religions.
Look, I'm glad you asked me that question. It's a very important question. So you can tell already from what you've said and what I've said. I don't agree. I'm an atheist too, like Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens. These guys are the worst crooks, intellectual, disreputable. I'm thinking of not to say too many rude words. And I wrote an article about them. You should look it up. I'll send it to you. I have a long version and a short version. The long version was published in a collection on religion and politics or something, and the short version is more readable. But I'm glad you asked me because I can talk about this for a minute. Have I got a minute or two to talk about it?
No,
okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So Harris is the worst. He wrote a book, something about faith. No, the end of faith or something. Yeah, it's a terrible, because it's anti-Islam. It's this Islamophobic treatise which is just disgusting. It's disgusting not because he's critical of Islam. He and Hitchens, who died, and Harris and Dawkins, I've seen them. They just behave rudely to everybody. They're very smart guys. Dawkins is the most brilliant science writer, and so, I mean, it's like he's two people, but his writing in science is the best. He's a smart guy. So I wrote this article. It was, can't remember the title. I had two versions of it. One was called, I'll think of it in a minute. Why did I write it? You see, these guys are not ordinary people. They're not like the average Islamophobic politician and like Trump or some idiot who talks and dismisses Islam. These are smart guys. They're the educated guys. These are the super sophisticated intellectuals. And when they talk about, and I quote them in this article, Islam, and they describe the terrible things that Islam is responsible for, they ignore the fact that it's the biggest, your question before, the atrocities, the crimes in the world are committed not, I mean, Islam has its share of crimes. But so who committed the crimes in Vietnam? Who committed the crimes in Afghanistan? In Latin America? The Americans. Now, the atheists in Washington, D.C. Now, so if you're going to measure who did the worst crimes, if you're going to try and play that game, I don't think that's quite the right thing to do. But, okay, if you acknowledge the crimes of the most extreme Islamic bad guys, what about the people who were responsible for millions and millions of atrocities and deaths? Now, why is Hitchens and Harris, they ignore this? They don't see it? They use some terrible phrase that the medieval Islamic tradition is they call it eye deep in red barbarity. They use terrible phrases. Well, who's deeper in red barbarity than the West, than their own? They ignore Vietnam. And so, look, I won't be able to try and repeat my argument here, but my argument is these are smart guys who actually, it's an interesting go back to the psychiatrist here, interesting psychological category. What goes on in the heads of these people who surely know the facts which I'm citing about what happened in Vietnam? You know, they cite how we're so noble. They say rubbish like this because in Vietnam, we prosecuted the guy, you know, the My Lai massacre, whatever his name was. The guy. And I quote a military person, every unit in Vietnam had a crime like My Lai. It wasn't an isolated case. The whole of Vietnam was a crime. We invaded this country and we killed, you know, maybe 3 or 4 million people. It was a shocking atrocity. Chomsky is at the forefront of fighting against it. He was the greatest heroic figure. Writing the Responsibility of Intellectuals article was about that period. And that's my theme. There is Hitchens and Harris and Dawkins and these guys, they're the ones that are culpable in the sense of the responsibility of real intellectuals, not, you know, the shock jock broadcasters or the tabloid media. These are the guys that are the worst propagators of the lies and the propaganda, and they themselves are victims of it in a funny. So that's an interesting category. So these guys are really despicable. It's an awful,
nasty word.
Reprehensible, intellectually, morally depraved, a form of depravity that's really disgraceful. And it's because they know and they should know more and should know better. So that's a very good question to ask about them. And so I always show that, and you know, I'm pleased that you compliment me. But that's why I was flattered to be asked by Muslims always to debate with them, because I don't share these outrageous, awful views. And you were right. We can respect each other if we disagree with each other, and we have to, have a way of. But we have to be honest about. Yeah. But the difficulty is always to be honest about our own crimes. That's what these guys are guilty of. And that's what Chomsky's always pointing out. Like these idiots, they always say, "What about their crimes?" Well, Chomsky says, "Yeah, but what about your crimes?" Yeah.
I have one last question. What do you think about scientists who believe in God?
Good question. So I gave my students, I'll show you how fair-minded I am. I gave my students some top scientists who believe in God. Simple answer. The arguments are awful. They give bad arguments. They're scientists, but they're scientists during the week, and then they go on to the church or to the mosque or wherever they go afterwards, and they like have got two minds. They're schizophrenic. They give arguments sometimes. So I gave arguments of scientists for God. Check the arguments. Look, the only question is how good is the argument? Their science doesn't give them God. They don't get their belief in God from the science. That's clear. Otherwise I would believe in God. If it was in the, I always make a slogan to explain my belief. I believe whatever in the science textbook. God is not in the science textbooks. I have to find another book for that. You understand my point? So the scientist doesn't, when he writes the scientific textbook to get his Nobel Prize in science, he didn't get it for his belief in God. He does that on the weekend. You understand? There's a kind of inconsistency there, because they're two different realms. Now, I wrote several pieces criticizing. There's one scientist, I can tell you who, Paul Davies. He's a very big shot scientist. He wrote lots of very good books on answer to your question, the Big Bang, black holes, you name it. And he wrote a book called The Mind of God. The Mind of God. So I was interviewed on Australian television about it. I did a very bad job. But then I had to write something. I was so frustrated that I didn't answer him properly. And so I wrote an article about why. You can find it. And his arguments are terrible. He's a good scientist and a good science writer. He gives terrible arguments. So I'll give you another example of a scientist. One of the top science writers in biology is Michael Ruse. I've met him. He's the top philosopher of biology. And he wrote a book not that long ago about trying to reconcile science and religion. I wrote a very critical review of that book because anyway, it was awful. His arguments are awful. In fact, I met him once and then he wrote me an email. My review was published. And then he wrote to me and the email just said, "Thanks, Peter." Like, thanks, but no thanks. He was obviously very cross. He didn't like my review. You can find my reviews because I answer these questions to show. So I'm giving you the best. Find the best scientists and look at what the arguments they make, and then read what I say, and then you decide who has the better argument.
What about Einstein's statement? God does not play dice with the universe.
He didn't believe in God. He was asked the question. He says he believes in Spinoza's God. Spinoza, the famous 17th century Jewish. He didn't believe in the traditional God who has views and beliefs. No, Einstein said God doesn't play dice with the world, but these were metaphors. It was a metaphor. In fact, one other person answered Einstein and he said to him, "Stop telling God what to do." It was a cute joke. In other words, he's always telling God things. Einstein, and it doesn't matter what Einstein said. It depends on what arguments, evidence. His theories don't give you any grounds for traditional religion. So you understand my answer is always, it doesn't matter what the person says or believes. The rational evidence and arguments, you have to look at both. Look at the strength of the arguments on both sides. So I can think of some other examples maybe, but if you look at the best cases I'm mentioning, if Paul Davies can't give you a good argument, or some Nobel Prize winners I've mentioned, I've got some others. Have a look at what they offer. So That's it? No more arguments?
I think you got to again, unless if you got one, we have to wrap up into one. I think you just continue. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much,
My pleasure.
Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you.
No, this is not like, what I'm trying to do is just that process that we
It's
have
wonderful.
a healthy discussion, intellectual discussion.
I enjoy it.
Yeah. And more about that, I think the people outside there need our help. You just try and help people.
No,
be good
I think it's very important. The
Yeah.
discussion is important, and I enjoy the differences and try and sorting it out. I'm trying to convert you all to be atheists.
You're so fast to convert you.
I didn't get any converts yet. And then you can all be unhappy like I am.
No, there is this token make apartheid history from BDS Malaysia. I give 2 T-shirt of the United Against Apartheid, but it's small. It is size L. I don't know whether you can wear it.
It's the wrong size. I have to give it to somebody else. It's the wrong size for me.
But I'll try to get the better.
Extra large.
Extra large. Your wife?
I don't know.
Can she wear?
Small. I don't know.
I think she can wear.
Same size as you.
I think it's better.
She can have that one. All right, that's for her.
So I'll try to get the extra one for you.
Yeah.
So this one we have the we do a style tournament just to raise awareness on Palestine. We call it. This is in Malay. Piala Palestine Merdeka is basically Palestine Trophy, Palestine Trophy, something like that.
Great, thank you.
It's just that is in a word. Basically, just thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this one is in Malay. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is basically Cinta Gaza, one of the NGO for Palestine. This one from BDS Malaysia. We organized it, I think September. Was it September? So you can put in your.
Great, thank you, very nice.
I know this is just a small book. This is translations of Quran I'm giving you.
Oh, very good. I have some.
English.
I have some good Quran translations. Yeah, I already have several, but I don't mind getting it.
Small one. Just,
Oh, it's not. The Arabic is not here.
So, it's better in English. Can you read Arabic?
I can read English.
Yeah, I know you can.
No, but I was learning. I have a wonderful Quran at home. I'm happy to have this. I have a wonderful Quran with Arabic and English, and I was learning Arabic from the Quran.
You learn Arabic?
I can tell you the first line of the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahmani ar-Rahim.
All right. The name of God, the most merciful, the most
gracious.
Yeah, the most gracious.
I can't remember the rest. But I have to learn more. But that's how I learned some of the text and the writing.
Yeah, I mean, just if you have time.
Yeah.
This is some Q&As, especially we have.
Lovely.
Well, this is a brief understanding of Islam. Read your pin.
What?
Your friend.
Thank you.
Just angkat gambar satu.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to give you the batik.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Wonderful.
So we are going
Thanks,
to have lunch. Thank you very much.
Good idea.
Right.
You better take this off.
Sorry? Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
If I go to lunch, then everybody will hear what I have to say for lunch.
Okay. This is a big